The earliest demigods predate the Erd Tree itself, emerging from the primordial crucible era, when gods and beasts were indistinguishable, a time so ancient that the very concept of divinity had not yet separated from the churning chaos of life's first forms. This single revelation unravels everything you thought you understood about the lands between, because the golden lineage we see shattered across Elden Ring's war-torn landscape is not the beginning of divine power, but merely one chapter in a cycle of godhood that stretches back before recorded history, before the greater will imposed its order, before Marika herself ascended to claim dominion over a world that had already witnessed the rise and fall of countless other powers. The demigods are not simply the tragic offspring of a broken goddess, they are the inheritors of bloodlines that twist through epics of transformation, each generation carrying forward mutations and blessings from eras when the boundaries between dragon and god, between beast and lord, between crucible knight and primordial champion were as fluid as molten gold. What From Software has hidden across item descriptions, environmental storytelling, cut content, obscure NPC dialogues, and the layered archaeology of the game's own lore is a secret history of divine evolution, a genealogy of power that explains why Godric grafts limbs with such desperate hunger, why Millennia's scarlet rot connects to an outer god older than the Erdtree, why Mohog's blood cult echoes rituals from before the Golden Order's sanitized theology, why Rani's path requires the death of her own divine flesh, why Radin holds back the stars themselves in a gesture that preserves an ancient cosmic order, why Rykard's blasphemous fusion with the serpent represents not mere madness, but a return to primordial unity, and why Morgoth's omen curse is not a random affliction, but a resurgence of the Crucible's original, unsuppressed nature, breaking through the Golden Order's artificial purity. These demigods are walking contradictions, beings who embody both the Erdtree's golden ambition and the suppressed chaos it was built to contain, and their war is not just a political struggle over great runes, but an existential crisis where every clash of demigod armies represents competing visions of what divinity itself should mean. The shattering did not merely break a ring of power, it shattered the carefully maintained illusion that the Golden Order had successfully erased all traces of what came before, and in the resulting chaos, the demigods have become living battlegrounds where ancient bloodlines war within their very bodies, where Marika's golden lineage collides with Radagon's red hair and all the secrets that Crimson Shade implies, where the Crucible's rejected aspects surge back through omen horns and vestigial wings, where outer gods press their influence through rot and flame and formless mother's blood, and where even the concept of life and death has become negotiable for those who inherited enough power to challenge the Erdtree's fundamental laws. You have fought these demigods, explored their crumbling domains, collected their great runes, and perhaps pieced together fragments of their stories, but the full scope of what they represent, the hidden connections that link them not just to each other, but to powers and ages that the Golden Order tried to bury, remains scattered across a game designed to obscure as much as it reveals. Every demigod carries secrets in their blood, their curses, their ambitions, and their failures. Secrets that explain why this particular family's collapse triggered not just a war, but a metaphysical crisis that threatens to unravel reality itself, why the greater will has withdrawn its guidance, why the two fingers offer only silence, why Queen Marika herself orchestrated the very shattering that doomed her children, and why your role as tarnished is not to restore what was but to forge something entirely new from the ruins of a divine order that was always built on suppressed truths and forgotten violence. The demigods are not merely boss fights or tragic figures, they are the key to understanding Elden Ring's entire cosmology, the living evidence of how gods are made and unmade, how power corrupts and transforms across generations, how the ambitions of one age become the curses of the next, and how even divine beings cannot escape the consequences of their origins. What makes their story so devastating is that almost none of them chose this fate. They were born into a war that began before their births, inheritors of grudges and blessings and mutations they never asked for, children of a goddess who was herself a prisoner of the very order she embodied, and their attempts to claim agency, whether through Rani's rebellion, Radhan's heroic stagnation, Millennia's loyal devotion, or Mog's heretical vision, only entangled them further in cycles of violence and transformation that echo patterns established in the Crucible era itself. The hidden facts that From Software has embedded in this narrative go far beyond simple lore entries. They represent a sophisticated meditation on inheritance and identity, on what it means to be born divine in a world where divinity itself is revealed as constructed, contested, and ultimately mortal, and on how even gods cannot escape the biological and metaphysical legacies written into their very essence. To understand any of it, we have to go back to the very beginning, to an age before the Erd Tree cast its golden light across the lands between, when the crucible churned with undifferentiated life, and the first beings who could be called gods emerged from that primordial chaos, not as the perfected golden forms the Erd Tree would later mandate, but as hybrid creatures where dragon wings and human ambition, bestial strength, and divine intelligence existed in forms that the Golden Order would later classify as impure, as omen, as misbegotten, as everything that needed to be suppressed for the new age to dawn. This is where the Demigod's true story begins, not with Marika's ascension or the Elden Ring's forging, but in the deep history that those events were designed to overwrite. And only by excavating this buried foundation can we understand why the demigods carry the specific powers and curses they do, why their bodies manifest the particular mutations and abilities that define them, and why their war represents not just a political crisis, but the return of repressed truths that the Golden Order spent ages trying to eliminate. The Crucible era was not primitive or lesser, it was simply different, an age when transformation was celebrated rather than feared, when the boundaries between species and forms were permeable, when what the Golden Order would call monstrous was simply natural, and the aspects of the Crucible, those breath attacks and tail appendages and horn growths that we see in ancient knights and omen alike, were not curses. In the age before the Erd Tree, before the Golden Order imposed its laws upon the lands between, there existed a time of primordial chaos and raw creation. This was the era of the Crucible, a period so ancient that its truths have been obscured by millennia of deliberate forgetting and the rewriting of history by those who would later claim dominion over all life. To understand the demigods who would shape the world, we must first understand the cauldron from which they emerged. The Crucible itself was not a place, but a state of being, a primordial source from which all life flowed in an undifferentiated torrent. Where later ages would see clear boundaries between God and beast, between dragon and mortal, between the divine and the earthly, the Crucible knew no such distinctions. It was a blending, a fusion of essences where the energies that would later be separated and categorized existed in chaotic unity. From this primal soup emerged forms both wondrous and terrible, creatures bearing wings and horns, scales and fur, divine light and bestial savagery, all at once. The Crucible did not discriminate. It simply created, endlessly and without pattern or purpose that mortal minds could comprehend. The earliest ancestors of what would become the demigod lineages emerged from this primordial state. These were not the refined, golden-blooded nobility that would later walk the halls of Leyndell. These were beings whose very bodies testified to the Crucible's chaotic nature. Some bore the tails of reptiles, others the horns of beasts, wings sprouted from unlikely places, multiple limbs, eyes in strange configurations, breath that carried flame or frost or lightning. All of these were marks of the Crucible's touch. In this age, such features were not seen as curses or deformities, but as blessings, proof of one's connection to the source of all life. The lineages were indistinct, bloodlines tangled and intertwined in ways that would later be deemed impossible or heretical. A being might claim descent from both dragon and god, from beast and spirit, and none would question the claim because the crucible made all such combinations not merely possible, but inevitable. Among the first to rise to prominence in this primordial age was Placidusax, the Dragon Lord. He was not merely a dragon, but something greater, a being who embodied the pinnacle of draconic might and majesty. His form was massive beyond comprehension, his scales harder than any metal that would later be forged, his breath capable of reducing mountains to ash. But more than his physical might, Placidusax possessed something that set him apart from other creatures of the Crucible. He possessed will, ambition, and the intelligence to transform power into rule. He established his dominion in Farum Azula, a city that defied the normal laws of existence. This was no ordinary settlement of stone and mortar. Farum Azula existed outside the normal flow of time, suspended in a state between moments, a place where past and future collapsed into an eternal present. The architecture of Farum Azula reflected its impossible nature, great temples and arenas carved from stone that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles, bridges that connected towers across distances that should not exist, and at its heart a great throne where Placidusax held court. The Dragon Lord did not rule alone. He was served by the ancient dragons, beings of immense power in their own right, creatures who had mastered the red lightning that split the primordial skies. These dragons were not the diminished drakes or wyverns that would populate later ages. They were true dragons, each one a force of nature, capable of speech and reason and the wielding of incantations that could reshape reality itself. The ancient dragons saw in Placidusax not just strength, but legitimacy, a ruler whose claim to power was validated by his very existence. Alongside the dragons served the beastmen, creatures that bore the forms of lions, wolves, and other predators, but walked upright and wielded weapons with skill that matched any human warrior. The beastmen of Farum Azula were not mere servants, but devotees, priests who revered the storm as a manifestation of divine will. They conducted rituals in the great temples, calling down lightning to sanctify their rites and prove their connection to the primordial energies of the crucible. The storm itself was seen as sacred, not merely weather, but the breath of creation, the roar of the crucible made manifest in the physical world. Yet even in this age of draconic supremacy, other powers stirred. From the crucible emerged an Empyrean, a being chosen by forces beyond mortal understanding to serve as a vessel for divine will. She would become known as the Gloam-Eyed Queen, though whether this was a title she claimed or one bestowed upon her by terrified witnesses remains unclear. Her origins were mysterious, even by the standards of the Crucible Age. Some fragmentary accounts suggest she arose spontaneously from the Crucible itself, a manifestation of one of its darker aspects. Others hint that she was born to an earlier generation of gods, beings whose names have been completely erased from history. What is certain is that she possessed a connection to one of the fundamental forces of existence, destined death itself. Destined death was not merely the act of dying, but the principle that all things, even gods, must eventually end. It was the certainty of cessation, the promise that nothing, no matter how powerful, could endure forever. In the Crucible Age, destined death flowed freely through the world. Gods could die, dragons could perish, even the Crucible itself, theoretically, could come to an end. The Gloam-Eyed Queen did not merely understand this principle, she wielded it as a weapon. Her eyes, it was said, held the color of dusk, that liminal time between day and night, between life and death. To meet her gaze was to glimpse one's own ending, to see the moment of your death reflected back at you. This power made her terrifying to all who knew of her existence, but she did not work alone. The Godskin Apostles formed under her leadership a cult of warriors and assassins who shared her vision of a world where even gods could be held accountable, where even the mightiest could be brought low. The apostles were not born, but made, transformed through rituals that bound them to destined death and granted them a fraction of their queen's terrible power. They developed a practice that would become their signature and their curse. They hunted gods. When they found their prey, they did not simply kill. They flayed the divine flesh from their victims' bodies, peeling away skin that shimmered with inner light that radiated power even in death. From this harvested skin, they created their garments, robes, and armor that granted them protection and power that allowed them to channel the strength of their fallen prey. Each apostle wore the deaths of gods upon their bodies, a walking testament to the gloam-eyed queen's philosophy that nothing was sacred, nothing was eternal, nothing was beyond the reach of destined death. The Godskin Apostles spread across the lands between like a plague, targeting nascent gods who had emerged from the crucible and claimed domains for themselves. They struck at dragons who had grown complacent in their power. They challenged the existing order wherever they found it, not to replace it with their own rule, but seemingly to prove a point, to demonstrate that the hierarchy of power was not fixed, that the strong could fall and the eternal could end. Fear spread among the gods and dragons. Alliances formed out of desperation. Beings who had been rivals found common cause against the threat of the Godskin Apostles and their terrible queen. Yet the Apostles were skilled, relentless, and empowered by destined death itself. They could not be easily stopped, and their numbers seemed to grow with each successful hunt. During this tumultuous age, another force existed quietly, not yet dominant, but present nonetheless. The primordial Erd Tree, sometimes called the Great Tree in the oldest fragments of lore, stood as a manifestation of life and growth. It was not the golden, radiant beacon that would later dominate the landscape of the lands between. This early tree was smaller, less refined, its light dimmer, and its influence limited to a relatively small area. It represented an alternative to the Crucible's chaos, a principle of ordered growth and structured life. But in the Crucible Age, such order held little appeal. The world was wild, and wildness was celebrated. The primordial Erd Tree was largely ignored by the great powers of the age, seen as a curiosity rather than a threat or an opportunity. In the midst of this chaos, a mortal was born who would eventually reshape the world. Godfrey entered the Crucible Age as a warrior of unmatched strength and skill, but he was not born to any great lineage or divine bloodline. He was simply a man, albeit one whose prowess in battle exceeded that of any other mortal of his time. In an age where gods and dragons and Empyreans wielded reality-altering powers, Godfrey had only his strength, his axe, and his indomitable will. He was unaffiliated with any faction, serving no dragon lord or god queen. He fought for himself, for the joy of battle, for the testing of his limits against the strongest foes he could find. The Crucible Age suited him perfectly, offering an endless supply of challenges and enemies worthy of his attention. In the frozen peaks of the mountaintops of the giants, another power thrived in isolation. The fire giants were a race of massive beings who served the Fell God, a deity of flame and destruction whose power rivaled that of the dragons. The giants wielded fire not as a tool, but as an extension of their very being. Their flames were not the ordinary fires of wood and coal, but the Fell God's flame, a supernatural inferno that burned with such intensity it could melt stone and boil the air itself. The fire giants saw themselves as the rightful rulers of the mountain peaks, and they viewed both the dragons of Farum Azula and the nascent Erd Tree as threats to their dominion. Skirmishes broke out along the borders of their territory, with dragons descending from the skies to test themselves against the giants' flames, and the giants responding with volleys of fire that turned the sky itself red. Finally, in the windswept plains of Limgrave, the Storm Lord held sway. This being, rival to Placidus Sax himself, commanded the tempests that swept across the lowlands. Where Placidus Sax wielded red lightning and ruled from his timeless city, the Storm Lord was a creature of the open sky and the howling wind. The Storm Lord's form remains a mystery, described in contradictory ways by different sources, but his power was undeniable. He could summon hurricanes with a gesture, call down lightning that dwarfed even the ancient dragon's red bolts, and ride the winds themselves as if they were solid ground. The Storm Lord clashed repeatedly with dragonkin who ventured into Limgrave, and with early human tribes who sought to settle the fertile plains. These tribes, primitive by later standards, nevertheless possessed a fierce independence and a determination to carve out their own place in the Crucible Age, even if it meant defying beings of godlike power. The Gloam-Eyed Queen's campaign against the gods escalates beyond isolated acts of rebellion into a full-scale war against the divine order itself. Her followers, the Godskin Apostles, are not mere zealots, but skilled ritualists who have mastered the art of flaying divinity from flesh. They hunt down minor deities, scattered across the lands between, beings whose names have been lost to history, but whose deaths leave permanent scars on the fabric of reality. These minor gods, remnants of the age when divinity was plural and contested, fall one by one to the black flames wielded by the apostles. The flaying rituals serve a dual purpose. First, they strip the gods of their immortal essence, reducing them to mortal vulnerability. Second, the apostles fashion the divine skin into garments and vestments, wearing the flayed remains as both armor and symbol of their victory over the old order. This practice is not merely pragmatic, but deeply theological. By wearing the skin of gods, the apostles believe they can absorb fragments of divine power while simultaneously proving that godhood itself is nothing more than flesh that can be peeled away and discarded. The demigod ancestors, progenitors of bloodlines that will later dominate the lands between, also become targets. These proto-demigods are beings of immense power, but not yet organized under a single banner or theology. Some dwell in isolated strongholds, others wander as champions of forgotten causes. The gloam-eyed queen views them as obstacles to her vision of a world freed from the tyranny of eternal life. Destined death, the rune she wields, allows her to permanently end even these mighty beings. Unlike the Golden Order's later practice of returning souls to the Erd Tree for recycling, death under the Gloam-Eyed Queen's power is absolute and final. The souls do not return, do not reincarnate, simply cease. This theological difference will become one of the central conflicts defining the age to come. During this same turbulent period, a young Numen Empyrean named Marika emerges from obscurity. The Numen are a race of long-lived beings from beyond the lands between, a people shrouded in mystery even in the fragmented records that survive. What brings Marika to these contested lands remains unclear, though some accounts suggest she fled persecution or sought refuge from calamities in her homeland. Empyreans are individuals chosen by the Two Fingers, or at least possessing the potential to be chosen, as vessels for an outer god. Marika exhibits this potential from an early age, though the full extent of her abilities remains dormant. She is not yet a god, not yet a queen, merely a figure of promise moving through a world tearing itself apart. Marika's early movements bring her into contact with scattered human settlements struggling to survive in the shadow of dragons, beastmen, and the gloam-eyed Queen's crusade. She witnesses firsthand the suffering caused by the absence of order, the chaos of a world where death is either absolute annihilation or the predatory consumption practiced by the ancient dragons. In these observations, the seeds of her future ideology take root. Where the gloam-eyed queen sees liberation in death's finality, Marika begins to envision a different solution, a world where death is controlled, managed, made orderly rather than chaotic or absolute. The greater will, an outer god of order and causality dwelling in the space between stars, has been observing the lands between for centuries. Unlike other outer gods that embody rot, frenzy, or blood, the greater will represents structure, hierarchy, and the imposition of cosmic law upon the material world. It does not communicate directly but through intermediaries, the two fingers, beings that serve as living conduits for its intentions. The greater will has grown dissatisfied with the state of the lands between. The age of dragons has stagnated, Placidusax's god has fled, and the gloam-eyed queen threatens to unmake the very concept of divine permanence. The greater will seeks a new vessel, a new order, and in Marika it identifies the perfect candidate. The fingers, grotesque appendages that move with unsettling intelligence, make contact with Marika in circumstances lost to time. Some accounts place this meeting in the depths beneath Landell, in caverns where the roots of what will become the Erdtree already pulse with golden light. Others suggest the fingers found her in the mountain tops or in the ruins of an ancient Numan settlement. Regardless of location, the message is clear. Marika is offered godhood, not as a distant possibility, but as a concrete path. The greater will grant her the power to reshape the lands between, to establish a new age, but she must accept its vision of order. She must become the vessel through which the greater will's law is made manifest. Marika does not accept immediately. The historical fragments suggest a period of deliberation, of testing. She seeks allies, resources, a foundation upon which to build. This search leads her to Godfrey, the newly crowned chieftain of the Badlands, whose reputation as a warrior of unmatched prowess has spread across the lands between. Godfrey has united the scattered tribes through strength, but strength alone cannot sustain an empire. He recognizes in Marika something beyond martial power, a vision that complements his own ambitions. Their alliance begins as a practical arrangement, two ambitious figures recognizing mutual benefit, but it will evolve into something more complex, a partnership that shapes the next age of the world. Godfrey brings to the partnership his warriors, his tactical genius, and his sheer physical might. Marika brings the promise of divine power and the backing of the greater will. Together, they begin to plan the overthrow of the existing order. Their first target is not the dragons, too powerful and entrenched, nor the scattered minor gods, too numerous and dispersed. Their target is the gloam-eyed queen, the single greatest threat to the vision of controlled, orderly death that the greater will demands. The campaign against the gloam-eyed queen is not a single battle, but a protracted conflict spanning years, perhaps decades. Marika, still ascending toward full godhood, cannot yet wield the totality of divine power. Instead, she relies on strategy, on alliances, on the slow accumulation of strength. Godfrey's warriors hunt down godskin apostles, disrupting their rituals and preventing them from claiming more divine victims. Marika herself engages in theological warfare, offering an alternative vision to those who might otherwise join the gloam-eyed queen's cause. Where the gloam-eyed queen promises liberation through death's finality, Marika promises security through death's control. Souls will not be annihilated, but preserved, recycled, returned to the great tree that will become the center of her new order. The decisive confrontation comes when Marika, now fully empowered by the greater will and bearing the Elden Ring, a manifestation of the greater will's law made physical, faces the gloam-eyed queen directly. The details of this battle are deliberately obscured in later Golden Order histories, but the outcome is clear. Marika defeats the gloam-eyed queen not by killing her, for such an act would validate the very principle of final death that Marika opposes, but by stripping her of power. The rune of destined death, the black flame that allows for true mortality, is torn from the gloam-eyed queen's control. This act of deprivation transforms the theological landscape of the lands between. Destined death, once wielded as a weapon of liberation, becomes a prisoner, a dangerous artifact that must be contained. Marika cannot destroy it, for it is a fundamental aspect of the Elden Ring itself, woven into the cosmic order. Instead, she chooses imprisonment, sealing destined death away, where it cannot threaten her vision of controlled immortality. The task of guarding this sealed rune falls to Malekith, Marika's half-brother and shadow-bound beast. The nature of their relationship is complex, rooted in Numen traditions that remain obscure. Malekith is not merely a servant, but a shadow, a being mystically bound to Marika's existence, sharing a connection that transcends normal loyalty. Empyreans are granted shadows by the Two Fingers, guardians, who serve as both protector and, if necessary, executioner should the Empyrean stray from the greater will's design. Malekith accepts the burden of guarding destined death with full knowledge of what it means. He must keep this rune sealed not just from external threats, but from Marika herself, should she ever seek to reclaim it for purposes contrary to the greater will's order. The weapon used to contain destined death is a blade, later known as the Rune of Death itself, sealed within Malekith's flesh. He becomes both guardian and prison, carrying within his own body the power to grant true death. This burden weighs on him constantly, a hunger that gnaws at his being. The sealed, destined death seeks release, seeks to fulfill its function, and Malekith must resist this pull eternally. To aid in this task, he is granted additional power, becoming the Blackblade, a title that reflects both his role and the nature of the force he contains. With the gloam-eyed queen defeated and destined death sealed, the Godskin apostles scatter. Without their queen and without access to the power that made their flaying rituals permanently lethal, they become fugitives. Some go into hiding, preserving their traditions in secret enclaves. Others continue their work in diminished form, hunting lesser targets and waiting for an opportunity to reclaim their lost power. The Godskin Noble and Godskin Apostle, titles that will persist through the ages, become markers of a fallen order, remnants of a theology that lost its war against the emerging Golden Order. Marika's victory over the gloam-eyed queen establishes her as the preeminent power in the lands between, but it also locks her into the greater will's vision. By sealing destined death, she commits herself and her future order to a world where death is not final, where souls return to the Erd Tree, where the cycle of life becomes controlled and predictable. This decision will have consequences that echo through every subsequent age, shaping the very nature of existence in the lands between, and setting the stage for conflicts that will not be resolved for millennia. With the giants subdued and the Crucible's champions brought to heel, Marika and Godfrey turned their gaze toward the greatest threat to their nascent order, the ancient dragons who had ruled the skies since time immemorial. These were not mere beasts, but the inheritors of a civilization older than any other in the lands between, creatures whose mastery of lightning and stone had shaped the very landscape. At their head stood Placidus Sax, the Elden Lord of a previous age, a being of such terrible majesty that even the memory of his reign would echo through the centuries. The dragons represented not merely a military obstacle, but a philosophical one. Their order was predicated on eternal dominion, on the right of the strong to rule without question or change. Marika's Golden Order, by contrast, promised something new, a structured hierarchy bound by divine law rather than raw power. The two visions could not coexist, and so war became inevitable. The campaign against the dragons was unlike any conflict that had come before. Where the giants had fought with fire and fury, the dragons wielded the very elements themselves. Their scales turned aside conventional weapons, their breath could reduce a stone to slag, and their command of ancient incantations made them nearly invincible in open battle. Godfrey understood that brute force alone would not suffice. He needed to break not just the dragons' bodies, but their spirit, to demonstrate that the age of their supremacy had passed. His strategy was methodical and brutal. Rather than engaging the great worms directly, he first moved against their vassals and tributaries, the lesser creatures who had thrived under draconic protection. The Stormhawks were among these, majestic raptors whose wings could summon gales and whose talons had never known defeat. They nested in the highest peaks, serving as the dragon's eyes and messengers, their cries heralding the approach of dragonfire. The Stormhawk King ruled from a crag so high that clouds perpetually shrouded its summit. This creature was no mere animal, but a being of ancient intelligence, said to understand the speech of dragons and men alike. Its feathers were prized beyond measure, each one imbued with the essence of the storm itself. To the dragons, the Stormhawk King was a symbol of their dominion over the skies, a reminder that nothing flew without their sufferance. Godfrey's decision to hunt this creature was as much symbolic as strategic. He climbed the mountain alone, refusing the aid of his warriors, determined to prove that no height was beyond the reach of the Golden Order. The battle lasted 3 days and nights, or so the legends claim. The Stormhawk King summoned winds that could flay flesh from bone, lightning that split the mountain itself. But Godfrey was relentless, his strength seemingly without limit. When he finally descended, the great raptor's corpse was draped across his shoulders, its golden eyes dimmed forever. The message was clear. The old powers would bow or break. With each victory, Godfrey's legend grew, and with it, the morale of Marika's forces. Warriors flocked to their banner, drawn by the promise of glory and the certainty of divine favor. The Crucible Knights, those champions who bore the blessings of the primordial chaos, fought with particular ferocity, their horns and wings marking them as living bridges between the old world and the new. Yet even they understood that the Crucible's time was passing, that the chaotic vitality they embodied would soon be seen as impure under the Golden Order's rigid theology. For now, though, they were indispensable, their ability to match the dragon's physical might, making them the vanguard of every assault. The war's crescendo came at Farum Azula, the crumbling Tempest City that served as the seat of draconic power. This was no ordinary fortress, but a place outside the normal flow of time, a fragment of a previous age preserved by ancient sorceries. Its architecture defied comprehension, great columns of stone suspended in midair, bridges that led nowhere and everywhere, halls that echoed with the roars of dragons long dead. Here Placidusax held court, his 4 heads surveying his domain from a throne carved from a single mountain. The Dragonlord was already wounded when Godfrey's forces arrived, bearing scars from some earlier conflict whose details had been lost to history. 2 of his heads hung limp, their eyes clouded, their jaws slack. Yet even diminished, he remained a being of incomprehensible power, each of his remaining heads capable of unleashing destruction on a scale that dwarfed anything Godfrey had yet faced. The siege of Farum Azula was less a battle than a series of desperate skirmishes across a landscape that actively resisted comprehension. Time flowed strangely within the Tempest City, moments stretching into hours, days compressing into heartbeats. Warriors would find themselves fighting alongside their own ghosts, echoes of battles yet to come or long past. The dragons used this to their advantage, appearing and disappearing through temporal rifts, striking from angles that should not have existed, Godfrey's solution was characteristically direct. He ordered his forces to destroy the great bells that hung throughout the city, massive instruments whose ringing seemed to anchor Farum Azula to its timeless state. As each bell fell silent, the city's defenses weakened, reality reasserting itself in fits and starts. The final confrontation between Godfrey and Placidus Sax took place in the heart of the tempest, where lightning never ceased and the wind howled with the voices of dead gods. The Dragon Lord fought with the desperation of a being who understood that his defeat meant not just death, but the erasure of everything his reign had represented. His red lightning, the ancient power that predated even the Erdtree's gold, carved canyons in the stone and set the very air ablaze. Godfrey met each assault with his axe, that great weapon whose edge had tasted the blood of giants and gods. The battle's conclusion remains shrouded in mystery. Some accounts claim Godfrey struck the killing blow, others that Marika herself intervened with some secret sorcery. What is certain is that Placidus Sax was gravely wounded, his remaining heads scarred beyond healing, his body broken. Rather than face final death, the Dragon Lord retreated into a slumber beyond time itself, lying down in a place where past and future converged, waiting for a lord who would never return. With Placidus Sax's defeat, the dragon's unified resistance crumbled. Some, like the great worm Gransax, attempted desperate assaults on Lindell itself, only to be struck down at the very gates of Marika's capital. Others fled to distant corners of the lands between, hiding in mountain caves and forgotten valleys, nursing their hatred and their memories. A few, recognizing the futility of continued resistance, chose a different path. Lanceax, one of the ancient dragons and sister to the fearsome Fortisax, made the remarkable decision to adopt human form and study the ways of the Golden Order. Her transformation was not merely physical, but philosophical, a genuine attempt to understand what this new age offered. She would later become a priestess of the dragon cult, teaching mortals the incantations of her kind, translating the dragon's lightning into prayers acceptable to the Golden Order. Her choice was controversial among both dragons and humans, seen by some as wisdom and by others as the ultimate betrayal. The establishment of the Golden Order as the supreme authority over the lands between was not a single moment, but a gradual process of consolidation and codification. Marika used the Erdtree not merely as a symbol, but as an active tool of governance. Its roots spread beneath the earth, touching every corner of the realm, while its light shone as a constant reminder of divine presence. The runes of the Elden Ring, which Marika now controlled absolutely, were distributed according to her will, empowering those who served her vision and denying grace to those who resisted. This was the true genius of her system. Power flowed from the center, from her, and could be granted or revoked as she saw fit. The old ways, where strength alone determined dominion, were replaced by a hierarchy of divine appointment. Godfrey's coronation as the first Elden Lord formalized what had already become reality. He was not merely Marika's consort, but the embodiment of her will made martial, the axe that enforced her law. The ceremony took place beneath the Erdtree itself, witnessed by all who mattered in the new order. Godfrey knelt before Marika, and she placed upon his shoulders the mantle of lordship, binding him to her with chains more powerful than any forged in smithies. Their union was both political and mystical, a merging of her divine authority with his warrior's strength. Together, they would rule an age of unprecedented stability, or so the promise went. The demigods who would later tear the realm apart were not yet born, their tragedies still unwritten. As the Golden Order ascended, the Crucible's influence necessarily waned. What had once been celebrated as the source of all life became suspect, its chaotic vitality at odds with the Order's emphasis on purity and hierarchy. The aspects of the Crucible, Those strange blessings that manifested as horns, wings, and tails were increasingly viewed as deformities rather than gifts. The omen, those born bearing the crucible's marks most prominently, would in later ages be persecuted and imprisoned, their very existence an embarrassment to a regime that preached perfection. The Crucible Knights themselves, despite their service, found their status ambiguous, honored for their past deeds, but quietly discouraged from prominence. The theology of the Golden Order required a clean break from what came before, a narrative of ascension from chaos to order, from darkness to light. The truth that Marika's power was built upon the foundations of the crucible, that her demigods would bear its marks in their blood, was a complication best ignored. The demigods' ancestors, those beings who had emerged from the crucible's primordial soup, found their histories rewritten to suit the new mythology. Lineages were traced not to the chaotic vitality of the primordial age, but to divine appointment, to Marika's grace and Godfrey's strength. The crucible became a prehistory, acknowledged but diminished, its importance downplayed in favor of the Erd tree's golden light. Yet the truth could not be entirely suppressed. In the blood of every demigod, in the strange powers they would manifest, in the horns and wings and stranger things that would mark their descendants, the crucible's legacy endured. The Golden Order could reshape the present and dictate the future, but it could not entirely erase the past. That tension between what was claimed and what was true would eventually contribute to the Order's fracturing. But that crisis lay far in the future. For now, Marika stood triumphant. The Erd tree shone eternal, and a new age had truly begun. We now enter the early Erd tree age, a period known as the Erd tree dawn, when the chaotic forces of the crucible gave way to something altogether more ordered, more deliberate, and ultimately more powerful. This was the epoch in which Queen Marika the Eternal ascended as the vessel of the Elden Ring itself, transforming from a mortal Numen into a living god. The Elden Ring, that cosmic symbol of order and law, found its home within Marika's body, and through this union she established what would come to be known as the Golden Order. This was not merely a political system or a religious doctrine. The Golden Order represented a fundamental reordering of reality itself, a set of laws that governed life, death, causality, and fate throughout the lands between. Marika's ascension marked a decisive break from the primordial age that preceded it. Where the Crucible had celebrated the wild intermixing of all life, the Golden Order sought to categorize, to purify, to establish clear hierarchies and boundaries. The Erd tree, which had grown from the Crucible's chaotic energies, now became the central pillar of Marika's new regime. Its golden light, known as grace, would shine upon the worthy and guide them toward greatness. Those who could see the grace, the golden trails of light visible only to the chosen, were marked as special, destined for heroism or lordship. This grace became the most visible symbol of the Golden Order's influence, a tangible manifestation of Marika's divine will spreading across the realm. As the Eternal Queen, Marika began the monumental task of unifying the fractured lands between under the Erdtree's influence. This was no small undertaking. The lands were home to countless factions, tribes, and kingdoms, many of which had existed since before the Erdtree's rise. The giants of the mountaintops of the giants maintained their own civilization and worshipped their own fell god, a deity of flame that stood in direct opposition to the Erd tree's golden light. The ancient dragons, led by Dragon Lord Placidusax, had once ruled as the supreme powers of the realm before the Erd tree even existed. The fire monks tended to flames that predated Marika's order. The ancestral followers maintained their spirit worship in the underground cities. Each of these groups represented a challenge to Marika's vision of unified, centralized divine rule. To accomplish this unification, Marika needed more than divine power. She needed a champion, a warrior whose strength could enforce her will where persuasion failed. She found this champion in Godfrey, a warrior of such overwhelming might that his legend had already spread throughout the lands. Godfrey was not born to nobility or divine heritage. He was Huara Lu, a brutal warrior chieftain who had earned his reputation through sheer martial prowess. His strength was so immense, his battle fury so consuming, that he posed a danger even to his own cause. To temper this savage power, Marika bestowed upon him Seirosh, the aged lion lord who would cling to Godfrey's back and shoulders, acting as a regent of restraint. Seirosh's presence allowed Godfrey to channel his overwhelming strength with discipline and purpose, transforming him from a wild berserker into a noble lord. When Godfrey became Marika's consort, he was elevated to the position of First Elden Lord, a title that had never existed before. The Elden Lord was not merely a king or a husband. The role represented the martial and temporal complement to Marika's divine and eternal nature. Where Marika embodied the cosmic order and divine law, Godfrey embodied strength of conquest and the expansion of that order through force of arms. Together, they formed a complete sovereignty, divine authority backed by unstoppable military might. The union of god and warrior would become the template for the Golden Order's power structure, a model that would endure even through the Order's eventual fracturing. From this union came the first demigod child of the Golden Order, Godwyn the Golden. His birth represented something unprecedented in the history of the lands between. Godwyn was not merely the son of a queen and a lord, he was the child of a living god and the first Elden Lord, making him a being of both divine and mortal heritage. The golden light of the Erdtree seemed to shine with particular favor upon him. From his earliest days, Godwyn embodied the ideals that Marika wished to project. He was noble, virtuous, powerful, and beloved. Where Godfrey represented the Golden Order's strength and Marika its divine authority, Godwyn came to represent its promise, the hope that this new age would produce beings of unprecedented greatness. He was groomed from birth to be a symbol of everything the Golden Order could achieve, a golden prince who would inspire loyalty and devotion throughout the realm. But the establishment of the Golden Order did not go unopposed. Even as Marika consolidated her power and began spreading the Erdtree's influence, a rival emerged who threatened the very foundations of her new order. The Gloam-Eyed Queen rose to prominence as the leader of the Godskin Apostles, a faction that wielded a power antithetical to everything Marika had built. Where the Golden Order promised eternal life through the Erdtree's blessings and the removal of death from the natural order, the Gloam-Eyed Queen embraced death as the ultimate authority. She was an Empyrean, just as Marika had been, meaning she too had the potential to become a vessel for the Elden Ring and establish her own order. The fact that another Empyrean had risen to challenge Marika's supremacy represented an existential threat to the Golden Order's claim of absolute authority. The Gloam-Eyed Queen wielded a power known as destined death, the natural principle of mortality that governed all living things. This was not merely the ability to kill. Destined death represented true, final death, the kind of ending from which there could be no resurrection, no return, no grace given rebirth. In a world where Marika was working to establish eternal life for her followers through the Erdtree's blessings, the existence of destined death posed a fundamental contradiction. The Godskin Apostles, who served the Gloam-Eyed Queen, practiced rituals that reflected their philosophy. They hunted gods and demigods, flaying the skin from their divine victims and wearing it as garments. These godskin robes were not mere trophies. They represented the apostles' belief that even gods were subject to death, that divinity offered no protection from mortality's ultimate claim. The Godskin Apostles developed their own fighting styles and incantations centered around black flame, a dark fire that could burn away the very concept of life and inflict wounds that could not be healed by conventional means. This black flame was the physical manifestation of destined death's power, and it spread fear throughout the early Golden Order. Warriors blessed by the Erd Tree found that their grace offered no protection against these flames. The promise of eternal life under Marika's rule rang hollow when the Godskin apostles could inflict true permanent death. The Glomide Queen's influence grew as those who feared or resented Marika's consolidation of power flocked to this alternative vision, one that acknowledged death's supremacy rather than attempting to deny it. Marika could not allow this challenge to stand. To secure her vision of an eternal golden order, she needed to eliminate the threat posed by destined death itself. For this task, she turned to Malekith, her shadow-bound half-brother. Malekith was not merely a loyal servant or a powerful warrior. As Marika's shadow, he was bound to her by cosmic law, an extension of her will given form and purpose. Shadows were assigned to Empyreans by the greater will itself, serving as both protector and, if necessary, enforcer. Malekith's very existence was tied to Marika's survival. If she fell, so too would he. This made him the perfect instrument for the most critical task of the early Golden Order, the confrontation with the Glome-Eyed Queen. The battle between Malekith and the Glome-Eyed Queen has become the subject of legend, though few details of the actual combat survive in recorded history. What is known is that Malekith, wielding his colossal blade and his own formidable powers, confronted the Glome-Eyed Queen in single combat. Despite her command of destined death, despite the black flames that could kill even gods, Malekith emerged victorious. He defeated the Glome-Eyed Queen, though whether he killed her or merely subdued her remains a matter of scholarly debate. Some accounts suggest she was slain by the very power she wielded. Others propose that she was imprisoned or transformed, her identity stripped away, but her essence persisting in some diminished form. Regardless of her ultimate fate, her defeat marked a turning point in the Golden Order's consolidation of power. More importantly than the Glome-Eyed Queen's defeat was what Malekith did next. He took possession of destined death itself, the fundamental rune of mortality that the Glome-Eyed Queen had wielded. At Marika's command, Malekith sealed this power away, binding it within his own blade. The weapon would come to be known as the Rune of Death, and Malekith would bear it for ages to come, earning him the title of Malekith the Black Blade. By sealing destined death, Marika accomplished something unprecedented. She removed true death from the natural order of the lands between. No longer would gods, demigods, or even favored mortals face permanent endings. The Erd Tree would gather their souls and allow for resurrection and rebirth. This was the final piece necessary for Marika's vision of an eternal order, a world where her rule and her chosen followers would never face the ultimate consequence of mortality. The defeat of the Glome-Eyed Queen and the sealing of destined death had immediate consequences for her followers. The Godskin apostles, now leaderless and stripped of their most powerful weapon, found themselves scattered and hunted. Without access to the full power of destined death, their black flame incantations became mere shadows of what they once were, still dangerous but no longer capable of inflicting true, permanent death upon gods. Some apostles went into hiding, retreating to remote temples and forgotten ruins throughout the lands between. Others continued their hunt for gods and demigods, driven by ideology even without their queen's leadership. They became a persistent but manageable threat, dangerous enough to require vigilance, but no longer capable of challenging the Golden Order's fundamental structure. While Godfrey's campaigns secured the lands between through martial might, the fruits of his union with Queen Marika began to shape the very future of the Golden Order itself. Among these divine offspring, one figure would come to embody everything the Erd Tree represented. Godwyn the Golden, firstborn of the union between god and warrior, emerged not merely as another demigod prince, but as the living symbol of the age's promise. Where his father conquered through strength, Godwin inspired through virtue. The people of the lands between looked upon him and saw reflected back the ideals they had been taught to cherish: honor, compassion, martial excellence tempered by wisdom, and an unwavering devotion to the golden order that had brought them prosperity. Godwin's reputation grew not through calculated propaganda, but through genuine deeds that resonated across every stratum of society. He walked among common soldiers after battles, learning their names and honoring their sacrifices. He studied the ancient dragon communion rites, not to exploit them, but to understand the beings his father's armies had fought. In the grand halls of Lendal, the capital city that had risen beneath the Erd tree's boughs, nobles and commoners alike spoke his name with a reverence that approached worship. This was no accident of birth alone. Godwin possessed a charisma that seemed to radiate from him like the golden light that suffused the Erd tree itself, a presence that made those around him feel elevated, capable of matching the age's golden promise. The union of Marika and Godfrey proved remarkably fruitful, producing additional demigod offspring who would each carve their own place in the Order's hierarchy. Though history would remember Godwin most clearly, his siblings, Morgott and Mog, represented a darker truth that the Golden Order worked tirelessly to conceal. These twin brothers bore the curse of the omen, a condition that caused grotesque horns to sprout from their bodies and marked them as fundamentally incompatible with the perfection the Golden Order claimed to embody. That even the divine bloodline could produce such beings threatened the very foundations of Marika's carefully constructed theology. The twins were hidden away, their existence known only to the most trusted inner circles, imprisoned beneath the capital in the subterranean shunning grounds, where the unwanted and the cursed were cast to be forgotten. Yet even as Marika's first family took shape, another champion was rising through the ranks of the Golden Order's servants, a figure whose destiny would prove far more complex than anyone could have imagined. Radagon, a warrior of extraordinary skill and unwavering loyalty, distinguished himself in campaign after campaign. His red hair, unusual among the golden-haired faithful, marked him as different, yet his devotion to Marika's cause seemed absolute. He wielded both blade and incantation with equal mastery, and his tactical brilliance complemented Godfrey's raw, martial power. Where Godfrey embodied the warrior's path, Radagon represented something more refined, a fusion of intellectual rigor and combat prowess that made him invaluable to the expanding order. Radagon's rise through the hierarchy appeared, to outside observers, as a simple meritocracy in action, a talented champion proving his worth and earning greater responsibilities. The reality hidden behind layers of divine secrecy was far stranger and more profound. Marika and Radagon were not merely allies or even lovers. They were, in a sense that defied conventional understanding, the same being. At some point during the Erd tree's dawn, whether through divine transformation or a truth that had always existed, Marika and Radagon became two aspects of a single god. This duality allowed the divine to be in multiple places, to embody both feminine and masculine principles, to represent the totality of the Golden Order's power in a way no single form could achieve. The secret wedding of Marika and Radagon, conducted away from public eyes and witnessed only by those bound to absolute silence, represented not a union of two separate beings, but a merging, a conscious joining of divine essences that strengthened the fundamental structure of the Golden Order itself. This was magic and theology, operating at a level beyond what even the most learned scholars of the age could fully comprehend. The Elden Ring, that cosmic pattern of laws and principles that governed reality in the lands between, resonated with this union. The power flowing through the Erd tree intensified. The golden light that bathed Landell grew brighter still. From this impossible union came three children who would each become legendary in their own right. Rani, Radan, and Rykard entered the world bearing the weight of their parents' combined divinity. Though they were raised as the children of Radagon and Renala, queen of the Carian royal family, a truth that would only later come to light, their true parentage connected them directly to Marika herself. This made them not merely demigods, but beings with Empyrean potential, individuals who could theoretically ascend to godhood and claim the Elden Ring's power for themselves. Rani, the eldest of these three, demonstrated from her earliest years a mind that grasped concepts others struggled to comprehend. While her brothers pursued more conventional paths of strength and ambition, Rani turned her attention to the fundamental mysteries that underpinned existence itself. She studied under the most accomplished sorcerers of the Carian royal family, mastering the glintstone sorcery that the scholars of Raya Lucaria had perfected over generations. Glintstone sorcery, magic derived from the crystallized essence of stars and cosmic forces, represented a form of power that existed somewhat apart from the Golden Order's faith-based incantations. That an Empyrean would pursue this path suggested an independent streak, a willingness to look beyond the Erdtree's golden light to the cold stars beyond. But Rani's studies went deeper still. She sought out knowledge of the moon, that celestial body that held special significance for the Carian royal family. She learned of the dark moon, a cosmic force that represented hidden truths and the cold logic of the cosmos, untempered by the Erdtree's warmth. She studied the nature of souls and the mechanisms by which consciousness persisted after death. She questioned, in ways that would have been considered heretical, had anyone known the full extent of her inquiries, whether the Golden Order's claim to represent the only true path was actually accurate. These were dangerous thoughts for anyone, let alone an Empyrean who might one day be expected to uphold and embody that very order. Radhan, by contrast, seemed to embrace a more straightforward destiny. His prodigious strength manifested early, and he threw himself into martial training with an enthusiasm that reminded many of Godfrey himself. By the time he reached adolescence, Radhan could wield weapons that grown men struggled to lift. He studied under the greatest warriors the lands between could offer, mastering every form of combat, from mounted warfare to single combat. His ambition, however, reached beyond mere physical prowess. Radhan looked to the stars themselves and saw not mysteries to unravel through scholarly study, but forces to be conquered and controlled. This led him to the study of gravitational magic, a specialized form of glintstone sorcery that manipulated the fundamental forces holding the cosmos together. Through this magic, Radhan learned to alter the pull of gravity itself, making impossibly heavy objects light enough to wield or increasing gravitational forces to crush enemies beneath overwhelming pressure. The practical applications for warfare were obvious, but Radhan's interest went deeper. He studied the movements of celestial bodies, learning how gravity bound the stars in their courses. Some whispered that he sought nothing less than to hold back the very stars themselves, to exert his will over the cosmos in a display of power that would cement his legend for all time. Rykard, the youngest of the three, possessed an intellect that rivaled his sister's, but directed it toward very different ends. Where Rani sought cosmic understanding and Radhan pursued martial perfection, Rykard was drawn to power in its rawest, most pragmatic forms. He studied the law and governance, understanding that control over society's structures could be as potent as any sorcery. He rose to become praetor of the Erdtree's judicial system, a position of immense authority that allowed him to shape the very framework of justice in the lands between. But this legitimate power was never enough for Rykard's ambitious mind. In secret, away from the eyes of his family and the Golden Order's hierarchy, Rykard began exploring knowledge that the Order had deemed forbidden. He sought out texts describing the ancient practices that predated the Erd Tree's arrival, magics, and rituals that drew on forces the Golden Order claimed were heretical or dangerous. He became fascinated by the concept of immortality, not the spiritual eternal life promised by the Erd Tree, but physical, undeniable persistence of the flesh. He studied the mechanisms of life and death, seeking ways to transcend the limitations that bound even demigods. These investigations led him into increasingly dark territories, examining practices of sacrifice, blood magic, and communion with entities that existed outside the Golden Order's approved cosmology. The three children of Marika and Radagon thus represented three divergent paths, three different ways of engaging with the power and responsibility their divine heritage had granted them. Yet all three grew up during what history would remember as the Erd Tree's dawn, a period when such divergences seemed manageable, when the Golden Order's grip on the lands between appeared so secure that even the ambitions and heresies of demigods could be accommodated within its grand structure. This era of unparalleled prosperity was not merely propaganda or nostalgic exaggeration. The Erd Tree's influence had brought genuine benefits to the lands between. Crops grew with unusual abundance. Diseases that had plagued previous generations became rare. The constant warfare that had characterized earlier ages gave way to a peace enforced by Godfrey's armies and sanctified by Marika's divine authority. Trade routes stretched across the land, connecting regions that had once been isolated or hostile. Architectural marvels rose in every major settlement, temples and monuments that celebrated the Golden Order's triumph. Yet beneath this golden surface, contradictions were already forming. Marika's dual nature, as both herself and Radagon, represented a fundamental deception at the heart of the Order. The imprisonment of her omen children revealed that the Order's claims of divine perfection were built on the suppression of inconvenient truths. The growing independence of her Empyrean children, particularly Rani's interest in cosmic forces beyond the Erdtree's light, suggested that even divine bloodlines could not be fully controlled. These tensions remained largely hidden during the Erdtree's dawn, overshadowed by the age's genuine achievements and the overwhelming presence of the Erdtree itself. But they were there, seeds of future conflicts that would eventually shatter the golden peace and plunge the lands between into an age of chaos and war. As the Elden Ring's influence solidified the lands between into a structured hierarchy, the Golden Order's grip on the realm tightened. The Erd Tree, now fully ascendant, stood as a towering symbol of Marika's divine authority, its golden light casting a pervasive glow over the land. The Elden Ring's runes, mystical symbols that governed the fundamental laws of existence, ensured that order prevailed, binding the world to Marika's will. Yet beneath this veneer of stability, cracks began to form, particularly in the relationship between Marika and her first consort, Godfrey, the Elden Lord. Godfrey, once a fearsome warrior who had led Marika's forces to victory against the giants and other threats, found himself increasingly at odds with the peaceful era he had helped create. Having spent his life on the battlefield, he grew restless in the absence of conflict, yearning for the thrill of combat and the camaraderie of his warriors. This restlessness was not merely a personal struggle, but a reflection of his deeper nature. Godfrey was a man of war, and his very essence was tied to the act of conquest. The Golden Order's emphasis on stability and hierarchy left little room for the chaos of battle, and Godfrey's loyalty to Marika began to wane as he felt increasingly out of place in this new world. Marika, ever perceptive, recognized this growing divide. She understood that Godfrey's presence in the lands between could no longer serve the Golden Order's interests. His warrior spirit, once a source of strength, now threatened the delicate balance she had worked so hard to establish. In a decisive act, Marika stripped Godfrey of his grace, the divine blessing that marked him as her chosen consort and granted him his immense power. This act of severance was not merely symbolic, it was a profound rejection of his role in her vision for the lands between. With his grace removed, Godfrey was no longer the Elden Lord, and he and his warriors were exiled from the realm they had helped shape. Godfrey's departure marked a turning point in the history of the lands between. He left behind not only his title, but also his legacy as Marika's consort, taking with him the Tarnished, his loyal followers who would later play a pivotal role in the events to come. This exile was not merely a banishment, but a transformation. Stripped of their grace, the Tarnished were cast out into the unknown, destined to wander the world beyond the lands between until they were called back by Marika's will. Godfrey himself adopted a new identity, becoming known as Huara Lu, chieftain of the Badlands, and embracing the primal, untamed aspects of his nature that the Golden Order had sought to suppress. With Godfrey gone, Marika turned her attention to her new consort, Radagon, a figure whose rise to power would profoundly shape the future of the Golden Order. Radagon, a mysterious and enigmatic figure, had initially served as a champion of the Golden Order, leading campaigns against its enemies and embodying its ideals of unity and purity. His ascension to the role of Elden Lord was a deliberate choice by Marika, who saw in him a partner capable of refining and strengthening the doctrines of the Golden Order. Unlike Godfrey, whose warrior spirit clashed with the era of peace, Radagon was a unifying force, a symbol of harmony and discipline. Under Radagon's influence, the Golden Order's doctrines were further refined, emphasizing the importance of unity and purity in both the physical and metaphysical realms. Radagon's teaching sought to eliminate discord and impurity, reinforcing the idea that the Elden Ring's order was the only true path to enlightenment. This ideological shift had profound implications for the lands between, shaping its culture, religion, and governance. Radagon's emphasis on unity extended beyond the spiritual realm, influencing the political landscape as well. He sought to consolidate power under the Golden Order's banner, ensuring that all factions within the lands between adhered to its principles. Radagon's influence also extended to Marika's children, both those she bore with Godfrey and those she would later have with him. These demigods, destined to play pivotal roles in the future of the lands between, began to shape their own destinies under the watchful eyes of their parents. Godfrey's children, Morgott, Mog, and Godwyn, inherited their father's strength and ambition, though their paths would diverge in ways that reflected their individual natures. Morgott, cursed with the appearance of an omen, would become a steadfast defender of the Golden Order, while Mog, equally cursed, would embrace the dark influence of the Formless Mother, seeking to establish a dynasty of blood and blasphemy. Godwyn, the Golden, stood as a paragon of virtue, beloved by all and destined for greatness, though his fate would be tragically intertwined with the Knight of the Black Knives. Radagon's children, Rani, Radon, and Rykard, similarly embodied the ideals of the Golden Order, though their ambitions would lead them down vastly different paths. Rani, the Lunar Princess, sought to escape the influence of the Golden Order entirely, pursuing a path of rebellion and independence that would culminate in her plot to overthrow the gods. Radon, the Star Scourge, became a legendary warrior, revered for his strength and loyalty to the Golden Order, though his obsession with the stars would lead to his tragic fate. Rykard, the Lord of Blasphemy, initially served as a champion of the Golden Order, but his descent into heresy and his eventual transformation into a monstrous serpent marked a stark departure from its ideals. As these demigods grew into their roles, the seeds of future conflicts were sown. Their ambitions and destinies began to diverge, setting the stage for the events that would ultimately lead to the shattering. The Golden Order's emphasis on unity and purity created a rigid hierarchy that left little room for dissent, yet it also sowed the seeds of rebellion. Those who felt marginalized or oppressed by the Golden Order's doctrines sought alternative paths, embracing forbidden knowledge or aligning themselves with forces that stood in opposition to Marika's vision. This growing tension between order and chaos, unity and division, would come to define the future of the lands between. The Golden Order's rise reached its zenith under Radagon's leadership, but it also marked the beginning of its eventual decline. The stability and harmony that Marika and Radagon sought to impose were inherently fragile, dependent on the suppression of dissent and the elimination of impurity. As the demigods pursued their own ambitions, the cracks in the Golden Order's foundation began to widen, foreshadowing the turmoil that would engulf the lands between in the Age of the Shattering. The era of the Golden Order's rise concluded, leaving behind a legacy of unity and purity that would soon be tested by the forces of chaos and rebellion. The stage was set for the events that would reshape the world as the demigods' conflicting ambitions and destinies collided in a struggle for power and dominance. As the golden age of the Erd Tree waned, the lands between were thrust into chaos by an act of defiance that would echo through eternity. After the ring's shattering, Queen Marika, the Eternal, shattered the Elden Ring itself, an act of rebellion against the greater will, the cosmic force that had guided the Golden Order. This cataclysmic event fractured the fundamental laws of reality, plunging the world into a state of entropy and setting the stage for the Shattering War, a brutal conflict that would pit demigod against demigod in a struggle for supremacy. The once unified Golden Order, a system of divine governance and cosmic balance, was now in ruins, and the shards of the Elden Ring, known as Great Runes, became the ultimate prizes in a war that would reshape the lands between. The first ripple of this chaos came with the Night of Black Knives, a clandestine event orchestrated by Rani the Witch, an Empyrean destined to inherit the mantle of godhood. Empyreans, beings chosen by the Two Fingers, the emissaries of the greater will, were meant to ascend as vessels of divine will. But Rani harbored ambitions of her own, seeking freedom from the destiny imposed upon her. To achieve this, she conspired with the Black Knife Assassins, a shadowy group of killers tied to the Numen, Marika's own kin. Together, they infiltrated the sanctum of Malekith, the Black Blade, Marika's loyal half-brother and the guardian of the Rune of Death. This rune, a fragment of the Elden Ring, held the power to kill even the immortal demigods, a power that had been sealed away to maintain the Golden Order's eternal cycle of life and rebirth. By stealing fragments of the Rune of Death, Rani set in motion a chain of events that would forever alter the fate of the lands between. The assassination of Godwyn the Golden, Marika's beloved son and the paragon of the Golden Order, marked the first true tragedy of the Shattering War. In the heart of Lendel, the royal capital, Godwyn fell to the Black Knife Assassins, his soul extinguished while his body persisted in a grotesque state of undeath. This death of the soul was an unprecedented event, a perversion of the natural order that would have far-reaching consequences. Godwyn's death was not merely a loss for the Golden Order. It was a harbinger of decay, a symbol of the world's unraveling. His lifeless body, now a vessel for corruption, would become the source of Deathroot, a malignant force that spread through the roots of the Erd Tree, poisoning the land and giving rise to those who live in death, beings caught between life and the afterlife. Rani, meanwhile, used a fragment of the stolen Rune of Death to orchestrate her own Empyrean death, severing her ties to the Two Fingers and her physical form. By killing her mortal body, she freed herself from the shackles of her destiny, ascending as a spirit bound to a doll-like vessel. This act of self-sacrifice was both a rebellion and a transformation, allowing Rani to pursue her own path, one that would eventually lead her to challenge the very foundations of the Golden Order. Her Empyrean death, alongside Godwin's assassination, created a duality of death, a split between the death of the soul and the death of the body that further destabilized the natural order. The consequences of these events were immediate and devastating. The spread of death roots from Godwin's corpse corrupted the Erd Tree's roots, creating blighted regions where life could no longer flourish. This corruption seeped into the land itself, giving rise to grotesque creatures and twisted ecosystems. The Erd Tree, once a symbol of eternal life and divine grace, now bore the scars of death and decay, a stark reminder of the Golden Order's fragility. Amidst the chaos, Morgott and Mog, the Omen twins, emerged from the shadows. Born of Marika's lineage but cursed with the Omen affliction, a mark of impurity in the eyes of the Golden Order, they had been imprisoned in the subterranean shunning grounds beneath Leyndell. The Shattering War's upheaval provided them with an opportunity to escape their confinement. Morgott, despite being scorned as an Omen, harbored a deep loyalty to the Erd Tree and the Golden Order. Taking up the mantle of Grace-Given, he secretly defended Leyndell from invaders, wielding his immense strength and mastery of holy magic to protect the capital from the chaos engulfing the lands between. His actions, though driven by a sense of duty, were tinged with bitterness, for he knew that his contributions would never be acknowledged by those who saw him as a cursed being. Mog, on the other hand, embraced his Omen heritage, rejecting the Golden Order and its ideals. He sought to forge his own path, one that would elevate him to godhood. To this end, he abducted his half-brother Mikella, the most enigmatic of Marika's children, from the Halleck Tree, a sanctuary Mikella had created to cure the curses afflicting the land. Mikella, an Empyrean with the power to compel devotion, had been trapped in an eternal childhood, his growth stunted by a curse. Mog saw in him the potential to become a god of a new dynasty, one built on blood and sacrifice. By raising Mikella as his own, Mog aimed to challenge the greater will and establish a new order, one that would eclipse the Golden Order in both power and ambition. Meanwhile, Radon, the Star Scourge, made a decision that would have profound implications for the cosmos. A demigod of immense strength and a master of gravity magic, Radon had long idolized the stars and their conquerors, drawing inspiration from the celestial warriors of old. In an act of both reverence and defiance, he used his gravity magic to halt the movement of the stars themselves, freezing them in place. This act, while awe-inspiring, had unintended consequences, disrupting the cosmic balance and trapping the fate of countless beings in stasis. Among those affected was Rani, whose destiny was tied to the star's movement. Radhan's decision would later become a pivotal factor in the unfolding conflict, as forces sought to restore the star's motion and reclaim their lost destinies. Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, pursued a path of rebellion that would lead him to the depths of depravity. Residing in the Volcano Manor, a fortress of fire and ash, Rykard sought power to defy the gods and consume the world. To achieve this, he merged with the serpent Iglay, a monstrous entity that symbolized both temptation and corruption. This union transformed Rykard into a being of unparalleled malevolence, a living blasphemy that rejected the Golden Order and its principles. His ambition to devour the gods themselves made him a formidable and terrifying figure, one whose influence would extend far beyond the confines of the Volcano Manor. As these events unfolded, Malekith, the Black Blade, grappled with the weight of his failure. Consumed by guilt over the theft of the Rune of Death, He retreated to Farum Azula, an ancient and crumbling city floating in the skies. There, he became Marika's shadow-bound guardian, a silent sentinel tasked with protecting the remnants of the Golden Order. His presence in Farum Azula was a testament to his loyalty, but also a reminder of the betrayal that had set the Shattering War in motion. Malekith's role in the conflict would remain shrouded in mystery, but his actions, or inactions, would have lasting repercussions for the lands between. As the Shattering War erupted in full, the demigods and their factions clashed in a brutal struggle for control of the Great Runes and the title of Elden Lord. Each demigod sought to impose their own vision of order upon the fractured world, but their ambitions only deepened the chaos. Among them, Godric the Grafted stood out as a figure of desperation and weakness. The least powerful of the demigods, Godric fled Leyndell in the face of overwhelming opposition, retreating to Stormvale Castle, a fortress perched on the cliffs of Limgrave. To compensate for his inadequacies, he turned to grafting, a grotesque practice of attaching severed limbs and body parts to his own flesh. This macabre pursuit of power made him a figure of both pity and revulsion, a testament to the lengths to which the demigods would go to claim the Elden Ring's shattered remnants. The Shattering War was not merely a conflict of armies, it was a war of ideologies, a struggle to redefine the very nature of existence in the lands between. Each demigod, shaped by their own experiences and desires, sought to impose their will upon a world teetering on the brink of collapse. But as the war raged on, it became clear that victory would come at a cost, one that would leave the lands between forever scarred by the choices made in this tumultuous era. As the Shattering War raged on, Malenia, Blade of Miquella, stood as a beacon of resilience amidst the chaos. Leading her Cleanrout Knights, she defended the Haligtree, a sanctuary she and her brother Miquella had built to shelter those rejected by the Golden Order. The Haligtree itself was a marvel, a towering symbol of hope and defiance against the Erd Tree's dominance. Yet Malenia's struggle was twofold. She fought not only against external threats, but also against the scarlet rot festering within her. This affliction, born of an ancient curse tied to the outer god of rot, threatened to consume her entirely. Despite this, Malenia's indomitable will kept her standing, her prosthetic limbs a testament to her unyielding resolve. Her knights, the Cleanrot Knights, were equally formidable, their loyalty unwavering as they battled to protect their sanctuary. These warriors, clad in golden armor and wielding weapons infused with holy power, were among the most skilled fighters in the lands between, their devotion to Malenia and Miquella unshakable. Meanwhile, Miquella, the unalloyed, had entered an eternal slumber within his cocoon at the Haligtree. Known for his unparalleled intellect and compassion, Miquella sought to transcend his eternal childhood, a curse imposed by his nature as an Empyrean. His goal was to grow into a god, not for power, but to cure his sister of the scarlet rot. The cocoon, a vessel of his own design, was imbued with unalloyed gold, a substance he created to ward off the influence of outer gods. This eternal slumber was both a sacrifice and a gamble, as Miquella's absence left the Haligtree vulnerable. Yet his faith in his sister's strength and his own vision of a future free from divine interference drove him forward. The Haligtree, nourished by his essence, continued to grow, its roots reaching deep into the earth, a silent witness to the unfolding war. In Leyndell, the capital of the lands between, Radagon, the second Elden Lord, labored tirelessly to repair the Elden Ring. Once a champion of the Golden Order, Radagon's efforts were hindered by the fractured will he shared with Queen Marika. Their shared body, a union of two souls, was a paradox. Marika had shattered the Elden Ring, while Radagon sought to mend it. This internal conflict rendered his attempts futile as the ring's shards resisted his efforts. Radagon's devotion to the Golden Order was absolute, yet his inability to restore the ring symbolized the Order's decline. The capital, once a bastion of prosperity, now stood as a crumbling monument to a fractured era. Radagon's struggle was not just against the ring's broken state, but also against the inevitability of change, a force he could not control. Amidst this turmoil, the greater will, the outer god that had long guided the lands between, called forth the Tarnished. Once exiled, these individuals were now summoned back to fulfill their destiny, to reclaim the Elden Ring and restore order. The Tarnished, descendants of warriors who had fought in the Long March, were marked by grace, a divine blessing that guided them toward their purpose. Among them was the player's character, whose journey would shape the fate of the lands between. The Greater Will's decision to recall the Tarnished was both a desperate act and a calculated move, as it sought a champion capable of navigating the chaos wrought by the Shattering. This call to arms marked a turning point in the war, as the Tarnished's arrival introduced a new variable into the already volatile conflict. As the Tarnished began their journey, they encountered Morgott, the veiled monarch and last king of Lendl. Morgott, a descendant of the Omen lineage, had long been scorned for his cursed blood, yet his loyalty to the Golden Order was unwavering, and he ruled Lendl with a firm hand. To test the Tarnished's worth, Morgott defeated the fell omen, Margit, a projection of his own power, and imprisoned him outside Lendl. Margit served as a gatekeeper, challenging those who sought to enter the capital. Morgott's actions were both a defense of Lendl and a trial for the Tarnished, ensuring that only the strongest could approach the Elden Ring. His dual identity as both king and outcast reflected the complexity of his character, a ruler burdened by his heritage, yet dedicated to his duty. Guarding the entrance to Lendl was the Draconic Tree Sentinel, a formidable warrior clad in armor forged from dragon scales. This sentinel, a remnant of the ancient dragon cult, stood as a final obstacle for those seeking to enter the capital. His presence symbolized the Golden Order's alliance with the ancient dragons, a pact forged in the early days of the Erd Tree's reign. The Draconic Tree Sentinel's loyalty to Lendl was unquestionable, and his strength was unmatched, making him a formidable adversary for any challenger. His station outside the capital's gates underscored the city's impregnability, a fortress that had withstood the ravages of the Shattering War. Meanwhile, Millennia, driven by a desperate need to halt the spread of the Scarlet Rot, marched her Cleanrot Knights to Caelid. This region, once a verdant land, had become a desolate wasteland, its skies darkened by the Rot's influence. Millennia's target was General Radon, the Star Scourge, whose mastery of gravity magic had halted the movement of the stars. Radon's power was immense, his loyalty to the Golden Order unwavering, yet his ambition had unintended consequences. By holding the stars in stasis, Radon had disrupted fate itself, preventing the rise of new gods and prolonging the Shattering War. Millennia's confrontation with Radon was inevitable, as both were Empyreans, chosen vessels of divine power, and their clash would shape the fate of the lands between. The Battle of Aeonia was a cataclysmic event, a turning point in the Shattering War. Millennia and Radon faced each other on the battlefield, their forces clashing in a brutal conflict. The Cleanrot Knights, though outnumbered, fought with unmatched ferocity, their golden armor gleaming amidst the chaos. Yet despite her skill and determination, Millennia was unable to defeat Radon. In a final, desperate act, she unleashed the Scarlet Rot Bloom, a devastating explosion of rot that consumed everything in its path. The battlefield was transformed into a wasteland, the land itself corrupted by the rot's influence. Radon, though gravely wounded, survived, but the rot drove him mad, reducing him to a feral beast. He wandered the wailing dunes, his once great mind shattered, yet still holding the stars in stasis, a testament to his enduring strength. The aftermath of the Battle of Aeonia was devastating. The Cleanrot Knights, once a unified force, were scattered, many succumbing to the Scarlet Rot or retreating to the Haligtree to protect their sanctuary. Millennia, though victorious in her own way, was left weakened, her body further consumed by the rot. The Haligtree, now more important than ever, became a refuge for those seeking solace from the war's horrors. Yet the cost of Millennia's victory was immense, as Caelid was left in ruins, its people and wildlife corrupted by the rot's influence. As the war continued, Rani the Witch, another Empyrean, pursued her own agenda. Having cast aside her physical body, Rani's spirit now inhabited a doll body, a vessel she had crafted to escape the influence of the two fingers. Her goal was to overthrow the greater will and establish a new order, free from the control of outer gods. Rani's rebellion was a quiet one, conducted in the shadows of the Liurnian towers, where she plotted her next moves. Her shadow, Blad, remained fiercely loyal, despite her betrayal of the Two Fingers. Blad, a wolf-like warrior, was bound to Rani by fate, his loyalty unwavering even as his sanity began to fray. Their bond was a complex one, as Blade's very existence was tied to Rani's destiny, making his loyalty both a blessing and a curse. The Albinorics, artificial beings created through alchemical means, found themselves persecuted by the Golden Order. These beings, though intelligent and capable, were seen as abominations by the Order, their existence a challenge to its doctrines. Many Albinorics fled to the Haligtree, seeking refuge under Michaela's protection, while others served Rani, drawn to her vision of a new order. The Albinorics' plight was a reflection of the Golden Order's intolerance, its rigid beliefs leaving no room for those who did not fit its mold. Their presence in the war added another layer of complexity, as they fought not just for survival, but for a place in a world that had rejected them. As the shattering war raged on, the lands between descended further into chaos, its fate hanging in the balance. Each faction, each demigod, pursued their own agenda, their actions shaping the course of history. Yet amidst the turmoil, the Tarnished emerged as a beacon of hope, their journey a testament to the resilience of the mortal spirit. The war was far from over, and the stakes were higher than ever, as the fate of the Elden Ring and the lands between itself hung in the balance. As the shattering war raged on, the Round Table Hold emerged as a sanctuary for the Tarnished, those once exiled warriors called back to the lands between by the greater will. Guided by the enigmatic Two Fingers, emissaries of the greater will, the Tarnished were tasked with reclaiming the fragments of the Elden Ring and restoring order to the fractured world. The hold itself became a place of refuge and strategy, where warriors like Gideon Ofnir, the all-knowing, gathered knowledge to aid in the quest. Yet even within this sanctuary, the seeds of discord were sown as the Tarnished's paths diverged based on their own ambitions and interpretations of the greater will's designs. Amidst this chaos, the Dung Eater, a figure of revulsion and terror, began his campaign of defilement. His goal was not conquest, but corruption, seeking to spread his curse of perpetual suffering and degradation. By defiling the bodies of his victims, he aimed to create a world where all were equally cursed, a twisted vision of equality born of despair. His actions left a trail of blight across the lands between, tainting the very essence of life and further destabilizing the already fractured order. The Dung Eater's curse was a direct affront to the Erd Tree's golden order, embodying the decay and entropy that threatened to consume the world. Meanwhile, Fia, the deathbed companion, pursued her own dark agenda. A figure shrouded in sorrow and mystery, Fia sought to restore the soul of Godwin the Golden, the first demigod to fall in the night of the Black Knives. Her method was as macabre as it was ambitious. By embracing champions and drawing their strength, she sought to create those who live in death, beings who existed in the liminal space between life and demise. Fia's actions were driven by a desire to challenge the natural order imposed by the Erd Tree, offering an alternative to the cycle of life and death dictated by the greater will. Her alliance with the Tarnished, who shared her vision, further complicated the already intricate web of allegiances shaping the Shattering War. As the conflict intensified, the flame of frenzy began to stir, a force of primal chaos that threatened to consume the world in madness. The fire monks, guardians of the flame of ruin, clashed with the giants, who sought to harness its power for their own ends. This struggle was not merely physical, but ideological, as the flame of frenzy represented a rejection of all order and reason. Those who succumbed to its influence, like the tragic figure of Hieta, became vessels of its destructive will, spreading chaos wherever they went. The flame's rise was a stark reminder of the precarious balance upon which the lands between teetered, as the forces of order and disorder vied for supremacy. In the shadows of this turmoil, the Godskin apostles and nobles resurfaced, seeking to reclaim their ancient power. These enigmatic figures, draped in the black flame of god-slaying, had once been feared across the lands between for their ability to challenge even the divine. Their resurgence was a testament to the weakening of the Erd Tree's influence, as they sought to drape the world in their dark flame once more. The Godskin's presence was a direct threat to the demigods and the Tarnished alike, as their ambitions aligned with neither the greater will nor the forces of chaos. Their return added another layer of complexity to the Shattering War, as their god-slaying legacy posed a danger to all who sought to claim the Elden Ring. Simultaneously, the misbegotten, cursed descendants of the Crucible rose in rebellion against their oppressors. These beings, marked by their grotesque forms and connection to the primordial Crucible, had long been subjugated and reviled. Now, emboldened by the chaos of the Shattering, they seized castles and strongholds, asserting their place in the world. Their rebellion was not merely a fight for survival, but a challenge to the established order, as they sought to reclaim the dignity denied to them by the Erd Tree's golden order. The Misbegotten's uprising was a poignant reminder of the injustices woven into the fabric of the lands between, as the oppressed turned the tide against their oppressors. As these events unfolded, the Erd Tree's guidance began to wane, its golden light dimming across the land. This decline was both literal and symbolic, as the tree's influence over the world weakened in the face of relentless conflict and corruption. The Tarnished, once guided by the Erd Tree's grace, found themselves increasingly adrift, forced to rely on their own judgment and ambition. This shift marked a turning point in the Shattering War, as the Greater Will's designs were increasingly challenged by the actions of individuals and factions who sought to shape the world in their own image. The Two Fingers, once the undisputed intermediaries between the Greater Will and the demigods, began to lose their direct control over the Shard-Bearers. This loss of influence was a consequence of the demigods' growing independence and the Tarnished's defiance of the established order. The Fingers' inability to guide events as they once had left the fate of the lands between in the hands of the Tarnished and the remaining Shard-Bearers, each pursuing their own vision for the future. This decentralization of power further fragmented the world, as competing ideologies and ambitions clashed in a struggle for dominance. Amidst this chaos, the eclipse became a focal point for those seeking to revive Godwin the Golden. Castle Sol, a fortress shrouded in mystery and despair, became the center of this doomed prophecy. The eclipse was believed to hold the power to restore Godwin's soul, offering a glimmer of hope in a world consumed by darkness. Yet this hope was ultimately futile, as the eclipse remained elusive, and Godwin's fate was sealed by the irreversible corruption wrought by the Night of the Black Knives. The pursuit of the eclipse was a tragic reminder of the lengths to which individuals would go to undo the past, even as the world crumbled around them. As the shattering war reached its climax, the Tarnished began their journey to slay the Shardbearers and gather the great runes needed to challenge the Elden Throne. This quest was fraught with peril, as each Shardbearer wielded immense power and fiercely guarded their fragment of the Elden Ring. Figures like Radon, the Star Scourge, and Rykard, the Lord of Blasphemy, became formidable obstacles in the Tarnished's path, each embodying a different aspect of the chaos and ambition that defined the Shattering War. The Tarnished's journey was not merely a physical trial, but a moral one, as they were forced to confront the consequences of their actions and the weight of their choices. In the heart of Landel, Morgott, the Veiled Monarch, revealed himself as the true ruler of the capital. Once hidden in the shadows, Morgott emerged to defend the Erdtree against all who would claim the Elden Ring. His loyalty to the Golden Order was unwavering, and his determination to protect the Erdtree made him a formidable adversary. Morgott's reign was a testament to the resilience of the Old Order, even as the world around him descended into chaos. His presence in Landel symbolized the last bastion of the Greater Will's influence, a final barrier against the forces of change and rebellion. As the Tarnished approached the Erdtree, the final confrontation loomed, with the fate of the lands between hanging in the balance. The Greater Will's influence continued to wane as the Tarnished defied its designs and pursued their own paths to power. This defiance marked the culmination of the Shattering War, as the world stood on the brink of a new age or utter ruin. The choices made by the Tarnished would determine the future of the lands between, whether they restored the Elden Ring, embraced the chaos of the Flame of Frenzy, or forged a new path entirely. The Shattering War was not merely a conflict of arms, but a clash of ideologies, as the forces of order, chaos, and ambition battled for supremacy in a world teetering on the edge of collapse. As the Shattering War raged on, the demigods found themselves locked in a grueling stalemate during the Mid-Shattering Era, a period marked by stagnation and exhaustion. Despite their immense power and ambition, none of the demigods could muster the strength or strategy to fully claim the fragments of the Elden Ring, the source of all life and order in the lands between. This era, often referred to as the Stagnation, saw the once glorious ambitions of the demigods devolve into a series of desperate and destructive conflicts, each seeking to outmaneuver the other, while the lands between suffered under the weight of their war. One of the most pivotal moments of this era came with Radon, the Star Scourge, a demigod renowned for his mastery of gravitational magic. Radon's love for his homeland, Celia, and his desire to protect it from celestial threats drove him to perform a feat of unparalleled might. He halted the movement of the stars themselves. By freezing the stars in place, Radon not only safeguarded Celia, but also prevented the arrival of any further cosmic dangers, such as the falling star beasts or other celestial entities that might threaten the lands between. This act, while awe-inspiring, also had unintended consequences. The stars' stagnation disrupted the natural order of fate and destiny, a concept deeply tied to the cosmos in Elden Ring's lore. This disruption would later play a role in the Tarnished's journey, as the stars' movement is crucial to unlocking certain paths and fates. Meanwhile, Malenia, the blade of Miquella, was growing increasingly impatient with the stalemate. Determined to secure her brother Michaela's ascension and eliminate her rivals, she set her sights on Radon, viewing him as one of the greatest obstacles to her goals. Millennia, who had been afflicted with the scarlet rot since birth, had long struggled to contain its destructive power, yet she saw it as a weapon that could tip the scales in her favor. With her clean rot knights, an elite force of warriors who had endured the scarlet rot's corruption alongside her, Millennia marched into Caelid, Radon's stronghold, to confront him directly. The Battle of Aeonia, as it would come to be known, was a cataclysmic clash between two of the most powerful demigods in the lands between. Millennia's clean rot knights, clad in golden armor and wielding weapons infused with the scarlet rot, faced off against Radon's Redmane knights, fierce warriors loyal to their general's cause. The battlefield, located in central Caelid, became a hellscape of blood, rot, and magic as the two forces tore into each other. Radon, mounted on his loyal steed Leonard, wielded his colossal swords with terrifying precision, his gravitational magic allowing him to manipulate the battlefield itself. Millennia, on the other hand, fought with unmatched speed and grace, her prosthetic arm and blade cutting through her enemies like a whirlwind. For days, the battle raged on, with neither side gaining a decisive advantage. The stalemate seemed unbreakable until Millennia, driven to desperation, made a fateful decision. She unleashed the full power of the scarlet rot within her, allowing it to bloom in a catastrophic explosion known as the Scarlet Aeonia. This act transformed her into the goddess of rot, a state of being that elevated her power but came at a terrible cost. The Scarlet Aeonia ravaged the battlefield, corrupting Caelid's ecosystem and turning its once vibrant landscape into a wasteland of decay and pestilence. Radon, caught in the blast, was poisoned by the scarlet rot, which consumed his body and mind, leaving him a shadow of his former self. Once a proud and noble warrior, Radon was reduced to a mindless beast, wandering the wailing dunes and feasting on the corpses of the fallen. Millennia, too, paid a steep price for her actions. The transformation into the goddess of rot left her comatose, her body weakened by the immense power she had unleashed. It was Finley, a loyal clean-rote knight, who carried her unconscious form back to the Haligtree, Michaela's sanctuary, through hostile territories teeming with enemies. Finley's journey was a testament to her unwavering loyalty, as she braved countless dangers to ensure her commander's safe return. This act of devotion underscored the deep bonds between Millennia and her knights, who had endured the Scarlet Rot's corruption alongside her. Radahun's surviving forces, devastated by the loss of their leader, retreated to Redmane Castle, where they continued to hold out against the encroaching Scarlet Rot. Radahun himself, now a mindless monster, roamed the Wailing Dunes, his once great mind consumed by madness. The sight of the Star Scourge reduced to such a state was a grim reminder of the war's toll, not just on the land, but on the demigods themselves. Elsewhere in the lands between, Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, was undergoing his own transformation. Disillusioned with the war and the Erd Tree's dominance, Rykard sought a path to power that rejected the established order entirely. In the depths of Volcano Manor, he allowed himself to be consumed by the serpent Aglay, a creature of immense power and ancient lineage. This act of self-sacrifice merged Rykard with Aglay, transforming him into the god-devouring serpent, a monstrous being that embodied blasphemy and rebellion against the Erd Tree. Rykard's decision to abandon his ambitions for the Elden Ring in favor of this new form marked a turning point in his character, as he embraced a philosophy of devouring the gods themselves to achieve ultimate power. Tanith, Rykard's consort, played a crucial role in this new chapter of his existence. As the leader of the Recusants, a faction of Tarnished who had rejected the guidance of grace, Tanith began recruiting warriors to feed the god-devouring serpent, ensuring its growth and strength. Her loyalty to Rykard was unwavering, and she became a key figure in the blasphemous rituals that took place within Volcano Manor. The recusant's philosophy, which rejected the Erd Tree's authority and sought to forge a new path through destruction, stood in stark contrast to the other factions vying for control of the lands between. The Mid-Shattering era, marked by the stalemate between the demigods, was a time of profound change and devastation. The Battle of Ionia and the transformations of Radon, Millennia, and Rykard were defining moments that shaped the course of the war and the fate of the lands between. As the demigods struggled for supremacy, their actions left scars on the land and its people, setting the stage for the next phase of the shattering. The consequences of their choices would ripple through the ages, influencing the Tarnished's journey and the ultimate fate of the Elden Ring. Yet even as Morgott maintained his fragile illusion of order in Landel, the other demigods were carving their own desperate paths through the stagnation of the shattering. None exemplified this more than Mog, Lord of Blood, whose machinations in the shadows would alter the course of history. While the capital fixated on the specter of Godfrey's return, Mog performed his most audacious act, infiltrating the Haligtree's sacred roots to steal Miquella from his cocoon. The Empyrean's dormant form, suspended in transformative slumber within the husk of the Haligtree, was vulnerable precisely because his sister Millennia had left to wage her doomed campaign against Radon. Mog's communion with the Formless Mother granted him passage through the very blood of the tree itself, seeping through its vascular system like a corruption until he reached the sacred chamber where Miquella slumbered. The abduction was a masterstroke of both opportunity and prophecy. Mugwin Palace, that grotesque, inverted cathedral hidden beneath the Seofra River's blood-soaked soil, became Miquella's gilded prison. Here, Mog sought to elevate his stolen god through the darkest of baptismal rites, immersing Miquella in a sanguine cocoon fed by the dynastic tributaries of his accursed blood cult. The Formless Mother's whispers promised a new age, not of gold, but of blood, with Miquella as its unwilling deity. Yet the young Empyrean's flesh refused to wake, his consciousness perhaps resisting the violation, leaving Mog to preside over a hollow mockery of godhood where the vassals of his dynasty performed ceaseless rites to an unresponsive idol. While Mog played at theology in his underground kingdom, Morgott's governance of Landel grew ever more strained. The veiled monarch's elaborate ruse required constant maintenance. Golden effigies of Godfrey positioned at strategic points, perfumed envoys spreading carefully crafted rumors, even the manipulation of the Erd Tree's residual grace to create the illusion of the Elden Lord's imminent return. All this while secretly commanding the forces of Landel through proxies, his true identity known only to a select few like the perfumer Trisha, who concocted the aromatic veils that masked his cursed blood. The capital became a theater of shadows, where every proclamation bore double meaning, and the populace's hope was both weapon and burden for their unseen king. Beyond the capital's walls, the demigods turned their domains into fortresses against the creeping entropy. Millennia returned from her Pyrrhic victory over Radon, transformed the Haligtree into an impregnable sanctuary. Her clean-wrought knights, their armor fused with scarlet rot, stood eternal vigil while the misbegotten and Albinorix found uneasy refuge in its boughs. To approach the Haligtree now meant navigating concentric rings of defense, from the frenzied devotion of the kindred of rot at its roots to the spectral archers patrolling its branches, all watching for any repeat of Mog's violation. Meanwhile, Rykard's blasphemous experiments in Mount Gelmir reached their zenith as he fed himself to the immortal serpent Aigle, achieving a grotesque symbiosis that mocked the very concept of demigodhood. His recusants scoured the land for worthy opponents to sacrifice to their devouring god, their war against the Erd Tree now literal rather than ideological. In pathetic contrast to these transformations, Godric the Grafted cowered behind Stormvale's crumbling walls, his collection of severed limbs growing ever more deranged. Where other demigods evolved, Godric regressed, grafting the limbs of fallen tarnished onto his wasting body in a vain attempt to recapture the strength of his lineage. The castle became a charnel workshop where grafting surgeons like Master Hugh toiled endlessly to attach ever more incompatible flesh to their lord's crumbling form. Yet even in his weakness, Godric retained a spark of cruel ingenuity, setting traps for would-be conquerors and seeding his domain with grafted scions that mirrored his own patchwork horror. The silence of the two fingers during this period created a spiritual vacuum that reshaped the demigods' destinies. Once conduits of the greater will's guidance, these oracular entities ceased communication entirely, leaving their vassals to interpret this abandonment as they would. Some saw it as divine disapproval, others as a test of faith. For Rani the Witch, it presented an opportunity. Her corpse, discovered atop the Liurnia Divine Tower, was but a decoy, the true Empyrean having long since transferred her soul into a doll body of her own design. Yet this very act of rebellion carried unforeseen consequences, most tragically manifesting in her loyal shadow, Blade. The half-wolf knight began exhibiting signs of the finger's last cruel joke, a creeping madness designed to turn him against his mistress, his howls echoing across the moonlight altar as his mind fractured under conflicting loyalties. Liurnia's other great power, the Academy of Raya Lucaria, responded to the silence with isolation. The Cuckoo Knights sealed the great bridges, their glintstone sorcerers retreating into an endless debate about the nature of the stars, now that their golden guidance had faded. At the heart of this intellectual stagnation sat Renala, the once proud queen reduced to a broken vessel, endlessly rebirthing homunculi in a vain attempt to recreate the children stolen from her, first Rani by destiny, then Radagon by betrayal. The amber eggs Radagon left behind became both womb and prison for these imperfect creations, their larval weeping a constant counterpoint to the scholar's hollow debates. As institutions faltered, the Knight of Black Knives architects found themselves adrift. The Black Knife assassins, their purpose fulfilled with Godwin's death and their leader Electo imprisoned in the Moonlight Altar, became mercenaries in all but name. Some attached themselves to minor factions, like the Albinoric enclaves. Others turned to banditry, their god-slaying blades now tools of mere murder. Their scattered presence across the lands between, from the consecrated snowfields to the depths of Nokron, spoke to the disorder they had helped unleash. Their once unified purpose fractured like the Elden Ring itself. Perhaps most telling of the Erd Tree's waning influence was the resurgence of the Twinbird's Deathbirds. These ancient harbingers of ghost flame, long suppressed by Marika's order, now claimed dominion over death once more. Their skeletal priests established makeshift sepulchres across the lands between, from the windswept ruins of the Weeping Peninsula to the subterranean rivers of Siofra. Where the Erd Tree's roots withdrew, the Deathbirds moved in, performing their profane rites over corpses that would no longer return to the roots. Their ghost flame pyres became beacons of the old way, a death that was final, a cycle that was closed, and a quiet rebuke to the stagnation above ground. This, then, was the true nature of the stalemate, not a cessation of conflict, but its distillation into perpetual tension. The demigods, having exhausted themselves in open war, now waged their battles through proxies and preparations, each waiting for the moment when the fragile balance would tip in their favor. The two fingers' silence became a silence filled with whispers, of blood cults in the dark, of grafting surgeons sharpening their tools, of assassins without masters, and a wolf howling at a moon his mistress could no longer see. And beneath it all, the Haligtree's stolen god dreamed on, his slumber the fulcrum on which the next age would turn. As the stalemate among the demigods dragged on, the lands between became a crucible of unseen forces and rising tensions. Beneath the golden spires of Landel, in the labyrinthine sewers, the frenzied flame began to fester, its influence growing unchecked. Morgoth, the veiled monarch, was preoccupied with maintaining his rule over the royal capital, and his forces failed to notice the creeping corruption below. The sewers, once a place of exile for the unwanted, became a breeding ground for madness. The flame of frenzy, an entity of chaos and destruction, whispered its promises of oblivion to those who dared listen. Its influence spread through the downtrodden, particularly the merchants, who had been driven underground by the Golden Order's relentless persecution. These merchants, once traders of goods and stories, became unwitting conduits for the flame's insidious whispers, carrying its chaotic message to every corner of the lands between. Above ground, Gideon Ofnir, the all-knowing, was quietly amassing knowledge through his vast network of spies. A tarnished himself, Gideon had long abandoned the pursuit of becoming Elden Lord, instead dedicating himself to understanding the demigod's weaknesses. His agents infiltrated every faction, from the Golden Order to the Volcano Manor, gathering secrets that could be used to exploit the demigod's vulnerabilities. Gideon's motives were shrouded in mystery, but his actions hinted at a deeper strategy. He sought not just to understand the demigods, but to control the narrative of the shattering itself. His knowledge became a weapon, one that would later shape the fate of the Tarnished and the lands between. Meanwhile, the guidance of grace, the ethereal light that once beckoned the Tarnished toward the Elden Ring, began to shine anew. This renewed call drew the Tarnished back to the lands between, awakening them from their long slumber. These warriors, once cast out and forgotten, returned with a singular purpose: to claim the Elden Ring and ascend as Elden Lord. Among them were figures like the Tarnished of no renown, whose journey would become legendary. The Round Table Hold, a sanctuary for the Tarnished, was re-established as a gathering place for these aspirants. Located in a pocket dimension, accessible only to those touched by grace, the Hold became a hub of strategy and camaraderie. Here, the Tarnished shared knowledge, forged alliances, and prepared for the trials ahead. The Round Table Hold was not just a physical place, but a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in a fractured world, unity could be found. As the Tarnished began their journeys, the persecution of the merchants by the Golden Order reached its peak. These nomadic traders, who had once thrived in the lands between, were hunted down and driven into hiding. Their persecution was rooted in the Golden Order's fear of the flame of frenzy, which they saw as a threat to their divine authority. The merchants, however, were not merely victims. They became agents of change, spreading the flame's whispers wherever they went. This persecution had unintended consequences, as it deepened the divide between the Golden Order and the common folk, sowing seeds of dissent that would later erupt into chaos. In the eternal city of Nokron, hidden beneath the earth, the mimic tears grew restless. These sentient silver beings, crafted by the Nox to mimic life, had once served Miquella, the Empyrean who sought to create a new order. With Miquella's disappearance, the mimic tears were left without guidance, their purpose uncertain. Some began to escape to the surface, blending into the world above. These mimic tears, capable of taking on the appearance of any being they encountered, became both a curiosity and a threat. Their presence added another layer of complexity to the already tumultuous landscape of the lands between, as their true intentions remained shrouded in mystery. The Albinorics, a race of artificial beings created through alchemy, faced persecution from both the Golden Order and the recusants of Volcano Manor. These beings, divided into two generations, were seen as abominations by the Golden Order, who viewed them as a mockery of their divine creation. The recusants, led by Rykard, sought to exploit the Albinaurics for their own ends, seeing them as tools in their rebellion against the Erdtree. Faced with annihilation, many Albinaurics sought refuge at the Haligtree, a sanctuary created by Miquella for the outcast and downtrodden. The Haligtree, located in the consecrated snowfield, became a beacon of hope for those who had been cast aside by the world. Here the Albinaurics found temporary safety, though their fate remained uncertain in a world teetering on the brink of collapse. In Caelid, the region ravaged by scarlet rot, the Dragon Communion cult gained followers as people sought power to survive the relentless spread of decay. The cult, which practiced the ancient art of consuming dragon hearts to gain their strength, offered a path to power for those desperate enough to embrace it. The scarlet rot, unleashed by Millennia during her battle with Radahn, had turned Caelid into a wasteland, its inhabitants mutated and its lands poisoned. The Dragon Communion cult's rise was a testament to the lengths people would go to survive in such dire circumstances. Their practices, though heretical by the Golden Order's standards, provided a glimmer of hope in a land consumed by despair. Amidst these struggles, the demigod's stalemate created a power vacuum that allowed outer gods to extend their influence. The Formless Mother, an outer god associated with blood and suffering, began to exert her will through Mog, Lord of Blood. Mog, who had long worshipped the Formless Mother, sought to create a dynasty of blood, using her power to ascend as a god himself. His actions, though hidden from the world, marked a significant shift in the balance of power. The outer gods, once distant and enigmatic, began to take a more active role in the affairs of the lands between, their influence shaping the course of events in ways that would have far-reaching consequences. As the mid-shattering era continued, the lands between became a tapestry of competing forces, each vying for dominance in a world on the brink of collapse. The frenzied flames' whispers, Gideon's machinations, the Tarnished's return, the persecution of merchants, the restlessness of mimic tears, the plight of the Albinaurics, the rise of the Dragon Communion cult, and the growing influence of outer gods all wove together into a complex narrative. This era of stagnation was not merely a pause in the conflict, but a crucible in which the fate of the lands between was forged. The demigod's stalemate, once seen as a temporary lull, became the catalyst for the events that would shape the future of this fractured world. The Tarnished return marks the beginning of the present age, the era in which the lands between, fractured and desolate after the shattering, becomes the stage for a new chapter in its storied history. This age is defined by the arrival of the Tarnished, warriors once exiled from the lands between, who are now called back by the guidance of grace, a mysterious force that illuminates their path toward destiny. Their return heralds a reckoning for the demigods, the once godlike scions of Queen Marika the Eternal, whose war for supremacy left the realm in ruin. The Tarnished, though outcast and forgotten, are now the harbingers of change, tasked with challenging the demigods and reshaping the fractured order of the world. The Tarnished's journey begins in the desolate expanse of Limgrave, a region scarred by the aftermath of the shattering. Here, they first encounter Melina, an enigmatic figure who approaches them at the Church of Ella. Melina offers to serve as their maiden, a guide who will aid them in navigating the treacherous lands between. She introduces them to the concept of grace, the golden light that leads them toward their destiny, and explains the significance of the sites of grace, sacred points of respite scattered across the land. Melina's role is pivotal, for she not only provides guidance, but also grants the Tarnished the ability to level up, enhancing their strength and resilience as they prepare to face the demigods. Her motivations, however, remain shrouded in mystery, hinting at a deeper connection to the fractured world around them. As the Tarnished venture further into Limgrave, they begin to piece together the history of the Shattering, the catastrophic war that tore the lands between apart. This conflict was waged by the demigods, the children of Queen Marika and Radagon, who sought to claim the Elden Ring's shattered fragments and ascend to godhood. The war left the realm in ruins, with each demigod carving out their own domain and plunging the land into chaos. The Tarnished learn of the demigods' greed and ambition, their betrayal of one another, and the devastation wrought by their endless struggle for power. This knowledge sets the stage for their own quest, as they realize that to restore balance, they must confront and defeat these fallen deities. One of the first demigods the Tarnished encounter is Godric the Grafted, a pitiful yet tyrannical figure who clings to power in Stormvale Castle. Godric, once a member of the golden lineage descended from Godfrey, is now a shadow of his former self, his weakness driving him to graft the limbs of fallen warriors onto his own body in a desperate attempt to augment his strength. His rule over Stormvale Castle is marked by cruelty and oppression as he terrorizes the surrounding lands to maintain his grip on power. The Tarnished's path to Stormvale is guarded by Margit, the Fell Omen, a formidable foe who serves as a projection of Morgot, the Veiled Monarch. Margit's presence underscores the demigods' determination to protect their domains, even as their own power wanes. The Tarnished's victory over Margit is a turning point, proving their capability to challenge the demigods and foreshadowing the greater trials to come. With Margit defeated, they ascend to Stormvale Castle, where they confront Godric in a climactic battle. Godric's grotesque form, adorned with grafted limbs, is a testament to his desperation and obsession with power. Yet despite his monstrous appearance, he is no match for the Tarnished's resolve. Their defeat of Godric marks the end of his tyrannical rule over Stormvale Castle and serves as their first major victory against the demigods. This triumph, however, is but a prelude to the greater challenges that await them. Following their victory at Stormvale, the Tarnished return to the Church of Elay, where they encounter Ranni the Witch, a pivotal figure whose presence heralds the beginning of a new path. Ranni, a demigod herself, appears in the form of a doll, her spirit inhabiting this vessel as part of her own intricate plans. She introduces herself as a seeker of a new order, one that diverges from the Golden Order established by Queen Marika. Ranni's guidance leads the Tarnished toward the Age of Stars ending, a hidden outcome that promises a future free from the influence of the Greater Will, the outer god that governs the Elden Ring. Her motivations are complex, rooted in her rejection of the fate imposed upon her by the Greater Will and her desire to forge a new destiny for the lands between. Ranni's influence propels the Tarnished toward Liurnia of the Lakes, a region dominated by the Academy of Raya Lucaria and its enigmatic leader, Rennala, Queen of the Full Moon. Rennala, once a powerful sorceress and the matriarch of the Carian royal family, has been reduced to a shell of her former self, her mind consumed by grief after her separation from Radagon. The Academy, once a bastion of learning and magic, now stands as a fractured institution, its scholars divided and its halls filled with danger. The Tarnished's journey through Liurnia brings them face to face with Rennala, who despite her diminished state remains a formidable opponent. Their battle against her is a clash of sorcery and will, a testament to the enduring power of the demigods, even in their decline. Though the Tarnished emerge victorious, Rennala's defeat does not result in her death. Instead, she remains within the Academy, a broken figure who continues to cradle the Amber Egg, a relic tied to the rebirth of life. Her survival underscores the complexity of the demigods' fates, as their influence persists even in their diminished forms. The Tarnished's victory in Liurnia, however, solidifies their growing power and sets the stage for their next endeavor, as Ranni's guidance leads them toward the eternal city of Nokron. It is in Liurnia that the Tarnished also encounter Blide, Ranni's loyal shadow and a wolf-like warrior bound to her service. Blood's presence introduces the Tarnished to the mysteries of the Eternal City, a subterranean realm hidden beneath the lands between. Nokron, one of the Eternal Cities, holds the key to Rani's plan, for it is here that the Fingerslayer blade is hidden. This blade, a weapon capable of harming the Greater Will's emissaries, is essential to Rani's goal of severing her ties to the Outer God and forging a new order. Bled's aid proves invaluable as the Tarnished navigate the treacherous path to Nokron, uncovering the secrets of the Eternal City and the ancient civilization that once thrived there. The journey to Nokron is a descent into the unknown as the Tarnished traverse the depths of the lands between, encountering strange creatures and ancient ruins that hint at the city's lost glory. The Eternal Cities, once bastions of a civilization that rivaled the Golden Order, now lie in ruin, their secrets buried beneath layers of time and decay. Yet the Fingerslayer blade remains, a relic of immense power that holds the key to Rani's vision. The Tarnished's quest to retrieve the blade is a testament to their growing role in the unfolding drama of the lands between, as they move ever closer to shaping its future. As the Tarnished delve deeper into the mysteries of Nokron, they begin to understand the true scope of Rani's plan and the stakes of their journey. The Fingerslayer blade is not merely a weapon, but a symbol of defiance against the Greater Will, a tool that will enable Rani to challenge the very foundations of the Golden Order. The Tarnished's role in this endeavor is pivotal, for they are the catalyst that will determine the fate of the lands between. Their actions in Nokron mark a critical juncture in their quest, as they prepare to confront the forces that seek to maintain the fractured order and forge a new path toward the Age of Stars. The Tarnished, now armed with the Fingerslayer blade, retrieved from the depths of Nokron, the Eternal City, carried a weapon of immense significance. This blade, crafted from the remains of a slain Finger Maiden, was a key artifact in Rani the Witch's rebellion against the Greater Will, the cosmic force that governed the lands between. Its purpose was clear: to sever the influence of the two fingers, the emissaries of the Greater Will, and to dismantle the divine order that had long dictated the fate of the world. With this blade in hand, the Tarnished's role in Rani's grand design became undeniable, and their path forward was irrevocably tied to her ambitions. Before they could deliver the blade to Rani, however, the Tarnished faced a monumental challenge: Radon, the Star Scourge. Radon, once a demigod of unparalleled might, had halted the movement of the stars with his gravitational magic, effectively freezing the cosmos in place. This act had far-reaching consequences, not only for the heavens, but also for the Eternal City of Nokron, which remained inaccessible until the stars resumed their course. The Tarnished journeyed to Kaled, where Radon, now a hollowed shell of his former self, roamed the Wailing Dunes in a state of madness. The battle that ensued was nothing short of cataclysmic, as the Tarnished rallied alongside a coalition of warriors summoned by Jaren, Radon's loyal servant, to bring an end to the demigod's suffering. With Radon's defeat, the stars were finally set free, their movement unlocking the path to Nokron and signaling a turning point in the cosmic order. With the stars in motion once more, the Tarnished returned to Rani, delivering the Fingerslayer blade as promised. This act marked a critical juncture in her rebellion, as the blade allowed her to sever her ties to the two fingers and forge her own path. Rani's ultimate goal was to ascend to godhood on her own terms, free from the constraints of the Greater Will. The Tarnished, now deeply entwined in her plot, continued to serve as her instrument, aiding her in the pursuit of a new age of independence and self-determination. As Rani's plans unfolded, the Tarnished encountered Fia, the deathbed companion, a figure shrouded in mystery and tragedy. Fia's mission was rooted in the restoration of destined death, the natural cycle of life and death that had been sealed away by Queen Marika's Golden Order. Fia believed that the world's stagnation could only be undone by returning this fundamental force to its rightful place. Her journey led her to Deeproot Depths, a hidden realm beneath the Erd Tree, where she sought to unite the Rune of Death with the Elden Ring. The Tarnished, drawn into her cause, ventured into this subterranean domain, confronting the ancient guardians and uncovering the secrets of the Rune of Death. Fia's plan culminated in the creation of the Mending Rune of the Death Prince, a new rune that would integrate destined death into the Elden Ring, ensuring that death would once again be a natural part of existence. While the Tarnished navigated the complexities of Fia's mission, they also faced the threat of Mohg, Lord of Blood. Mohg, a demigod driven by a twisted vision of ascension, sought to elevate his brother Miquella to godhood through blood rituals conducted in his hidden palace beneath the lands between. Miquella, the most enigmatic of the demigods, had been imprisoned in a cocoon, suspended in a state of eternal slumber as Mohg attempted to awaken his latent potential. The Tarnished, drawn to Mohgwyn Palace by the echoes of his dark ambitions, confronted the Lord of Blood in a harrowing battle. Mohg's mastery of blood magic and his unrelenting devotion to his cause made him a formidable foe, but the Tarnished emerged victorious, thwarting his plans and ensuring that Miquella's fate remained unresolved. With Mohg defeated, the Tarnished turned their attention to Leyndell, the royal capital, where Morgott, the veiled monarch, continued to defend the city against all who sought to challenge its authority. Morgott, a cursed offspring of Marika and Godfrey, had long been scorned for his Omen heritage, yet he remained steadfast in his loyalty to the Golden Order. His reign over Leyndell was marked by his unwavering resolve to protect the Erd Tree and maintain the status quo, even as the world crumbled around him. The Tarnished, now a force to be reckoned with, confronted Morgott in the heart of the capital, engaging in a fierce battle that tested their strength and resolve. Morgott's mastery of holy magic and his indomitable spirit made him a fearsome adversary, but the Tarnished ultimately prevailed, ending his reign and uncovering the truth of the Erd Tree's thorns. These thorns, a manifestation of the Erd Tree's rejection of the unworthy, posed a final obstacle to the Tarnished's quest. To gain entry to the Erd Tree and claim the Elden Ring, the thorns would need to be burned away, a task that required the Flame of Ruin, a sacred fire capable of consuming even the divine. Melina, the Tarnished's enigmatic companion, offered herself as kindling for this flame, sacrificing her existence to ignite the fire and pave the way for the Tarnished's ascension. Her selfless act marked the culmination of her journey and the beginning of the end for the Erd Tree's dominion. As the flames engulfed the sacred tree, the Tarnished stood at the precipice of a new age, ready to shape the future of the lands between. Each of these encounters, Rodden's fall, Ranni's rebellion, Fia's restoration of destined death, Mohg's defeat, Morgott's end, and the burning of the Erd Tree, represented a critical step in the Tarnished's journey. Their actions reverberated across the lands between, unraveling the threads of the old order and setting the stage for the dawn of a new era. The Tarnished, once an outcast, had become a catalyst for change, their choices shaping the destiny of a world teetering on the brink of transformation. As the flames of the Erd Tree illuminated the horizon, the question remained, what kind of world would the Tarnished choose to forge? Having secured the Flame of Ruin and set the Erd Tree ablaze, the Tarnished's actions set into motion a cascade of events that would irrevocably alter the lands between. The Erd Tree, long a symbol of the Greater Will's dominion and the order imposed by Queen Marika, now burned with a fury that could not be quenched. This act of defiance triggered the release of destined death, a primal force that had been sealed away by Malekith, the Black Blade, in ages past. With the Erd tree's flames consuming its divine essence, the lands between began to crumble, its once stable order fracturing under the weight of unleashed chaos. The Tarnished, now burdened with the responsibility of their actions, pressed onward, knowing that the path to becoming Elden Lord required confronting the very forces that had shaped the world. Their journey led them to crumbling Farum Azula, an ancient and decaying city suspended in the skies, where Malekith, Marika's half-brother and the keeper of the Rune of Death, awaited. Malekith, once known as Gurunk, had been tasked with sealing destined death after the Night of the Black Knives, when fragments of the Rune of Death were stolen and used to assassinate Godwyn the Golden. Consumed by guilt and rage, Malekith had become a fearsome guardian, wielding the Black Blade, a weapon imbued with the power of destined death. The Tarnished's confrontation with Malekith was a battle of desperation and determination, as the Black Blade's strikes carried the weight of inevitability. Yet through perseverance and skill, the Tarnished emerged victorious, claiming the Rune of Death and fully unleashing its power upon the world. With this act, the cycle of immortality that had defined the lands between was shattered, paving the way for true change. Returning to the lands between, the Tarnished faced one of their final challenges in the form of Gideon Ofnir, the All-Knowing. Once an ally and mentor, Gideon had grown disillusioned with the Tarnished's quest, believing that the path to Elden Lord was a futile endeavor. He sought to become Elden Lord himself, driven by his insatiable thirst for knowledge and his belief that he alone could restore order. Gideon's confrontation with the Tarnished was a clash of ideologies, as he wielded his vast arsenal of incantations and sorceries in a bid to prove his superiority. However, his reliance on knowledge over action proved his undoing, and the Tarnished emerged victorious, solidifying their claim to the throne. Next, the Tarnished encountered Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, who had returned to the lands between as Huara Lu warrior. Once Marika's consort and a champion of the Golden Order, Godfrey had been exiled long ago, stripped of his grace, and sent to wage war in distant lands. His return marked a pivotal moment, as he sought to reclaim his title and restore the order he had helped build. The battle between the Tarnished and Godfrey was a clash of titans, with Godfrey's raw strength and ferocity as Huara Lu pushing the Tarnished to their limits. Yet in the end, the Tarnished's resolve proved unbreakable, and Godfrey fell, his final words acknowledging the Tarnished's worthiness to ascend as Elden Lord. With the path cleared, the Tarnished entered the Erd tree, now a hollow and smoldering shell of its former glory. Within its depths, they confronted Radagon of the Golden Order, Marika's other self and the vessel of the Greater Will. Radagon, a figure of immense power and complexity, had been tasked with maintaining the Elden Ring and the order it imposed. His battle with the Tarnished was a testament to his divine strength, as he wielded the hammer of the Elden Ring with precision and fury. Yet as the Tarnished overcame Radagon, the true nature of the Greater Will's influence was revealed: the Elden Beast, a primordial entity that served as the physical manifestation of the Elden Ring. The Elden Beast, a creature of light and cosmic design, represented the ultimate challenge for the Tarnished. Its attacks were devastating, its form shifting and evolving as it sought to annihilate its foe. The battle was a test of endurance and adaptability, as the Tarnished navigated the Elden Beast's otherworldly abilities. With their victory, the Tarnished brought an end to the Greater Will's dominion over the lands between, severing the ties that bound the world to its divine mandate. In the aftermath of this monumental confrontation, the Tarnished stood at a crossroads, faced with the responsibility of shaping the future of the lands between. The choices before them were profound, each carrying its own implications for the world's destiny. One path led to the restoration of the Elden Ring, a return to the order established by Marika and the Golden Order, albeit under the Tarnished's rule. This ending represented a continuation of the past, a reaffirmation of the structures that had defined the lands between for eons. Another possibility was the Age of Stars, a vision championed by Rani the Witch. Rani, a demigod who had long sought to free the world from the influence of the Greater Will, offered the Tarnished the opportunity to usher in an era of darkness and mystery. By aligning with Rani, the Tarnished would reject the Golden Order and embrace a future where the moon and stars guided the world, a path that promised freedom from the constraints of divine rule. Other endings presented their own unique visions for the lands between. The Age of Fracture saw the Elden Ring restored but left incomplete, symbolizing a world of uncertainty and potential. The Age of Duskborn, achieved through the power of the mending rune of the Death Prince, introduced the concept of those who live in death into the Order, granting them a place in the world's new hierarchy. The Blessing of Despair, tied to the mending rune of the Fell Curse, imposed a cycle of suffering upon the lands between, a grim reflection of the world's inherent flaws. Finally, the Frenzied Flame ending, born of chaos and destruction, sought to burn away all that existed, reducing the world to ash in a nihilistic vision of rebirth. Each choice carried profound consequences, reshaping the fate of the lands between and its inhabitants. The Tarnished's decision reflected their understanding of the world's complexities and their vision for its future. Whether they ascended as Elden Lord, embraced Rani's Age of Stars, or pursued another path, their actions marked the culmination of a journey that had reshaped the very fabric of reality. As the Tarnished stood at the precipice of their destiny, the lands between awaited its new ruler, its fate now intertwined with the choices of one who had risen from obscurity to challenge the gods themselves. The era of the Tarnished had reached its zenith, and the world stood poised on the brink of a new age, shaped by the hands of its new Elden Lord, or guided by the stars of Rani's vision. The cycle of order and chaos, of creation and destruction, continued. But the Tarnished's legacy would forever echo through the annals of history, a testament to the power of determination and the enduring quest for meaning in a fractured world. As the Tarnished stood victorious over the smoldering remains of the Elden Beast, the lands between entered a new era, one marked by the fall of the demigods and the rise of a new order. This pivotal moment, occurring after the Tarnished's triumph, signaled the end of the age of the Erd Tree as it had been known and the beginning of a reshaping of the world. The Elden Ring, fractured and scattered for so long, was now reclaimed, its shards, the great runes, reunited under the Tarnished's stewardship. This act not only restored the Elden Ring's power, but also severed the direct influence of the demigods whose lineages had once wielded these fragments to shape the fate of the lands between. The Golden lineage, once the most dominant and revered of the demigod families, saw its final chapter written with the death of Morgott, the Veiled Monarch. His lifeless body lay in the Erd Tree Sanctuary, a somber reminder of the fall of his house. Morgott, despite his devotion to the Erd Tree and his role as its last defender, had been undone by the Tarnished's relentless pursuit of the Elden Ring. His death marked the end of the Golden lineage's direct rule over Leyndell, the capital city that had stood as a symbol of their power for centuries. Morgott's reign, though marred by his cursed omen heritage, had been one of unwavering loyalty to the Erd Tree and its order. His body, now still and silent, became a poignant symbol of the shifting tides of power. Meanwhile, Rani the Witch, ever enigmatic and driven by her own vision for the future, ascended to the stars in her ending. Her physical form was left behind, a mere vessel for her ambitions, as she transcended the mortal plane to forge a new path among the cosmos. Rani's ideals, rooted in her rejection of the greater will and her desire for a world free from its influence, remained intact even as she departed the lands between. Her journey, marked by her alliance with the Tarnished and her orchestration of the Night of the Black Knives, had always been one of calculated rebellion. Her ascension symbolized not just her personal triumph, but also the enduring legacy of her defiance against the established order. In the shadows of Mogwin Palace, another mystery unfolded. Miquella, the most enigmatic of the demigods, had been cocooned within the palace's depths, his fate tied to the ambitions of his brother Mog, Lord of Blood. Yet when the Tarnished arrived, the cocoon was found empty, its contents vanished without a trace. Miquella's absence left questions unanswered. Had he escaped, or had his transformation been interrupted? His fate remained shrouded in mystery, a lingering thread in the tapestry of the demigod's legacies. Miquella, known for his purity and his efforts to cure millennia's scarlet rot, had been a figure of hope and ingenuity. His disappearance left a void, one that hinted at unresolved possibilities and untold stories. Elsewhere, the corruption of Godwyn the Golden continued to spread unchecked. Godwyn, the first demigod to fall during the Night of the Black Knives, had become the Prince of Death, his body transformed into a source of deathroot that tainted the lands between. Despite the Tarnished's victory, the deathroot persisted, its tendrils creeping through the land and corrupting all they touched. Godwyn's legacy was one of tragedy and decay, a reminder of the catastrophic consequences of the rune of death's unsealing. His influence, though indirect, remained a significant threat, a dark undercurrent in the new order established by the Tarnished. The Erd tree itself, though scarred by the battles that had raged around it, began to show signs of healing under the Tarnished's stewardship. Once a symbol of divine power and the greater will's dominion, the Erd tree had been ravaged by the shattering and the subsequent conflicts. Yet with the Elden Ring restored, the tree's wounds slowly began to mend. Its golden light, though dimmed, still cast a hopeful glow over the lands between, a testament to the resilience of life and the possibility of renewal. The Erd tree's recovery symbolized the broader restoration of order, even as the world grappled with the legacies of the demigods and the scars of their fall. The Round Table Hold, once a gathering place for champions and warriors seeking to restore the Elden Ring, was now abandoned. Its purpose fulfilled with the demigod's defeat, the hold stood as a relic of a bygone era. The Tarnished, having achieved their goal, no longer needed its guidance or its fellowship. The Round Table Hold's halls, once bustling with activity, now echoed with silence, a testament to the end of the struggle that had defined the age of the Erd Tree. Its abandonment marked the closing of a chapter, one that had seen the rise and fall of countless heroes and the culmination of a quest that had reshaped the world. In the realm of Gelmir, the legacy of Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, lingered in the form of the Serpent Hunters. Rykard, who had sought to devour the gods and become a god himself, had been slain by the Tarnished, his ambitions thwarted. Yet his influence persisted in the form of the Serpent Hunters, warriors tasked with ensuring that no remnant of his blasphemous legacy could rise again. Rykard's quest for power, marked by his fusion with the serpent god Aglay, had been a dark and twisted path. His defeat did not erase the fear he had inspired, and the Serpent Hunters remained vigilant, guarding against the possibility of his return. Malekith, the Black Blade and loyal shadow of Queen Marika, had also met his end at the hands of the Tarnished. His weapon, the Black Blade imbued with the power of the Rune of Death, was recovered, its power now dormant without the rune's influence. Malekith's role as the Keeper of Destined Death had been a pivotal one, his actions shaping the course of the Shattering and the events that followed. His death marked the end of an era, one defined by the struggle to control the rune of death and its devastating power. The Black Blade, now silent, stood as a relic of that struggle, a reminder of the forces that had once sought to shape the fate of the lands between. With Morgoth's tyranny ended, the Tarnished established a new capital in Landel, the city that had once been the heart of the Golden Lineage's power. Freed from the grip of the demigods, Lindell began to rebuild, its streets once again filled with life and hope. The Tarnished's rule, though born of conflict, offered the promise of a new beginning, one in which the mistakes of the past could be rectified and the scars of the shattering healed. Lindell, now a symbol of renewal, stood as a testament to the Tarnished's vision for the future, a future shaped by the lessons of the past and the possibilities of a new order. As the lands between entered this new era, the legacies of the demigods continued to shape its destiny, their influence felt even in their absence. The Tarnished's victory had brought an end to their direct rule, but their stories, their ambitions, and their failures remained woven into the fabric of the world. The post-demigod legacies era, marked by both hope and uncertainty, was a time of reflection and rebuilding, a time in which the consequences of the shattering were reckoned with and the promise of a new order began to take root. The Tarnished, now the architect of this new world, faced the dawning task of guiding the lands between into an uncertain future, one shaped by the echoes of the past and the possibilities of tomorrow. As the Tarnished's new order takes shape, the Halig Tree, once a beacon of hope for the outcast and the downtrodden, begins to wither. Without Miquella's guiding hand, the tree's golden boughs lose their luster, its roots growing brittle and lifeless. The Halig Tree's followers, who had rallied around Miquella's vision of sanctuary and equality, scatter to the winds. Some retreat to the consecrated snowfield, seeking solace in its frozen expanse, while others wander aimlessly, their faith shaken by the loss of their demigod leader. Loretta, the Albinoric knight who once guarded the Halig Tree's secrets, disappears into obscurity, her fate unknown. The Halig Tree's decline serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of hope in a world still reeling from the shattering. Meanwhile, the Albinorics, long persecuted for their artificial origins, find refuge under the Tarnished's rule. Once hunted by the likes of Gideon Ofnir and the Order of the Erd Tree, these synthetic beings are granted a chance to thrive in the new order. Their settlements, such as the village of the Albinorics in Liurnia, become safe havens where they can rebuild their lives. Latenna, the Albinoric archer who once sought vengeance for her people, becomes a symbol of their resilience, her story inspiring others to embrace their identity without fear. The Tarnished's protection of the Albinorics marks a significant shift in the lands between, where prejudice and persecution are slowly replaced by tolerance and unity. Far to the north, the Volcano Manor, once a bastion of rebellion and blasphemy, falls into disrepair. With Rykard's cursed influence lingering like a shadow, the manor's inhabitants flee, seeking to escape the madness that consumed their lord. Tanith, Rykard's consort, vanishes into the wilderness, her loyalties severed by the demigod's grotesque transformation. The Recusants, once proud warriors who defied the Golden Order, disband, their purpose lost without Rykard's twisted vision. The manor itself becomes a crumbling ruin, its halls haunted by the echoes of blasphemous rituals and the remnants of Rykard's serpentine experiments. The fall of the Volcano Manor stands as a testament to the dangers of unchecked ambition and the consequences of defying the natural order. In the depths of the Eternal Cities, Nokron, Nokstella, and the nameless Eternal City, a new era of exploration begins. Once hidden beneath the earth, these ancient metropolises are now exposed, their secrets laid bare for all to see. Scholars, adventurers, and seekers of knowledge flock to the eternal cities, drawn by the allure of their advanced technology and enigmatic lore. The discovery of the mimic tear, a creation capable of replicating its master, sparks fascination and debate among the Tarnished scholars. The city's connection to the stars and their defiance of the greater will become subjects of intense study as researchers seek to unravel the mysteries of a civilization that dared to challenge the gods. The Tarnished, ever vigilant, commission scholars to study the remnants of the demigod's powers, hoping to understand the forces that shaped the shattering. Among these scholars is Thops, the humble sorcerer whose dedication to his craft earns him a place in the Tarnished's inner circle. His research into the glintstone sorceries used by Radagon and Renala sheds light on the interplay between magic and divinity. Meanwhile, the remnants of Millennia's scarlet rot and Rodden's gravitational powers are analyzed, their destructive potential a cautionary tale for future generations. The Tarnished's efforts to document and preserve this knowledge ensure that the lessons of the past are not forgotten. Caelid, however, remains a blighted wasteland, its recovery hindered by the lingering scarlet rot. The once proud region, home to Rodden's Redmane Knights, is now a desolate expanse of decay and despair. The rot's spread is slowed but not halted, its insidious influence still corrupting the land. Cleanrot Knights, once loyal to Millennia, wander aimlessly, their purpose lost with their demigod's defeat. The Tarnished's attempts to heal Caelid are met with limited success, as the rot's roots run deep, a reminder of the devastation wrought by the demigod's war. The region's plight serves as a sobering counterpoint to the hope blossoming elsewhere in the lands between. Amidst this turmoil, the Dragon Communion cult gains prominence, its followers worshipping the ancient dragons with renewed fervor. The cult's rituals, once practiced in secret, are now performed openly, their adherents seeking to harness the dragon's primal power. The discovery of Dragon Communion altars scattered across the lands between fuels the cult's growth, as more are drawn to the promise of strength and transformation. The Tarnished's tolerance of the cult reflects a broader shift in the world's spiritual landscape, where the rigid dogma of the Golden Order is replaced by a more diverse tapestry of beliefs. In Limgrave, remnants of Godric's grafted soldiers wander aimlessly, their purpose extinguished with their lord's defeat. Once feared for their grotesque enhancements, these soldiers now roam the countryside, their grafted limbs a testament to Godric's desperation. Some are taken in by the Tarnished, their skills repurposed for peaceful endeavors, while others succumb to madness, their minds unable to cope with the loss of their demigod master. The fate of Godric's soldiers serves as a poignant reminder of the human cost of the shattering, their suffering a stark contrast to the grandeur of the demigod's ambitions. Deep within Nokron, the Fingerslayer blade is discovered, its purpose sparking intense debate among the Tarnished's scholars. This enigmatic weapon, crafted by the Nox to slay the Two Fingers, the emissaries of the Greater Will, represents a direct challenge to the divine order. Some argue that the blade should be destroyed, fearing its potential to incite rebellion, while others advocate for its preservation, viewing it as a symbol of defiance against tyranny. The Fingerslayer blade's discovery reignites discussions about the nature of the Greater Will and the role of mortals in shaping their own destiny. As the Tarnished delves deeper into the remnants of the demigod's legacies, hidden texts detailing Marika's betrayal of the Greater Will come to light. These ancient writings reveal the Queen's role in orchestrating the shattering, her actions driven by a desire to break free from the Greater Will's control. The revelation shakes the foundations of the New Order, forcing the Tarnished to confront the complexities of Marika's legacy.